Hey there, Holly Show listeners. Nabus here, and I'm excited to share with you episode 100. Who would have thought that our little podcast would still be around since it made its debut back in October of 2016 with our inaugural guest, Tony B. Kim from Hero Within. It's been fun seeing comic conventions from a different perspective and meeting and getting to know some incredible indie creators, journalists, bloggers, and podcasters. I can be a bit nonchalant about special occasions, and I was just going to be sort of low-key about our 100th episode, but I recently got some good news, and it reminded me that it's important to celebrate the victories, even the small ones, especially during the pandemic. So with that, I'd like to welcome to the show my co-host, Alex Benedicto. What's up, Alex?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. And frequent guest host, Jason Lethert. What's up, Jason?
Hey, it's going great. How about for you guys?
Good, man. I want to welcome them both to the show as we catch up and reminisce. It's almost like the original Marvel Comics Defenders, Doctor Strange, the Hulk, and Namor reuniting to save the world. But I'll leave it to our audience to decide which character each of us is. Man, I'm just happy to meet up with you guys. I know that it's probably preferred that we meet up in person, but until we get this pandemic sorted out, this is probably the next best thing that we can do.
Definitely. It's, you got to make do with what you can, and it's a trying circumstance for all of us. But, one way I look at it is, we've watched lots of sci-fi stories where humanity is thrust into crazy, difficult situations, zombie apocalypses or whatever, and can our heroes make it through it? And in comparison, ours is relatively easier to deal with than that, and I think we're going to make it. It sounds like we're getting a little bit closer to that light at the end of the tunnel.
Yep, most definitely. Hopefully, fingers crossed. We'll definitely catch up on what we've been each doing during the pandemic, but I sort of want to get into, a little recap of our origin stories because it's been a while since we've talked about that. I guess we'll start with Jason. Where did you grow up and what kind of movies, TV shows, cartoons, books, or comic books were you into when you were growing up?
I grew up in a small suburb outside of Minneapolis. So pretty close to the city, but it was a fairly new suburb and was still pretty underdeveloped when we moved in. So it was still kind of a little bit of a small town, I guess. It was like about population 30,000 or so. Anyways, I think that a big, foundational experience for me was Star Wars. I actually watched Star Wars in the theater when it came out when I was like 5 years old in 78 or whatever. And that was a huge experience for me. Also, my parents were divorced and my dad would often take me on the weekends. And one of the things we'd always do is go to the movies. And James Bond was a huge thing for us. We'd every time a new Bond movie came out, that was a given that we were going to go see it that weekend. So that those are two very formative experiences for me. And then comic books. I really started loving superheroes through early cartoons I was seeing in the late 70s and became a huge fan of action cartoons and superheroes in general. And that really kind of set the stage for when I started collecting comics a few years later in the early 80s. And from then on, I just became a fan of generally all genre entertainment. I studied film in college and majored in journalism. And really started diving into, all corners of sci-fi, animation, um, uh, uh, horror, any type of genre material that I could find. And a big thing for me is the comic book adaptations into movies and TV, which, back when I kind of started studying it and becoming an aficionado, it was, the 90s when it was still kind of fairly new. And it's kind of funny now that it's really become such a major player in the industries, both television and film. And that's really kind of how I ended up formulating and starting my YouTube channel, HeroJournalism, where I analyze and dissect and delve into the history of a lot of these topics. So that's kind of, I guess, sums up my story.
Awesome. Alex.
Let's see. I grew up here in San Diego. I wasn't born here, but all I remember is San Diego. So we moved out here, I guess when I was 3, 4 years old. So as far as like TV shows, probably comedies from Three's Company to Knight Rider were like some of my favorite shows. Airwolf. I don't know if too many people know about Airwolf.
Oh yeah, love Airwolf.
It's kind of like the Knight Rider for helicopters, almost.
I know they had Airwolf and Blue Thunder playing at the same time, right?
Yeah,
Blue
Thunder was Blue Thunder was a movie, and I think it predated Airwolf. But then it also became a television show,
right,
with with TV actors instead of the movie actors, Roy Schneider and
that's right, Roy Schneider. It was another helicopter themed television show.
Yes, exactly. It was a high tech. That's why it was called Blue Thunder, because it was a police helicopter, but it was very much like Airwolf, a little less sci-fi than Airwolf, though. But Airwolf,
I'll probably watch it then. Yeah. See, TV shows, cartoons, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Super Friends, and those are like my go-to shows back in the days. So that's about it. Comic books. I didn't really start getting into comics probably until like junior high, when some like classmates were really into it, and they got me interested in that. But I wasn't too much into comics as a kid, but more as my teenage and probably more in the college years.
Yeah, as for me, similar to Alex, I grew up in a military family, so we moved around quite a bit. I was born in Hawaii, and then moved to San Diego. And I remember as a kid watching Space 1999, Star Trek, and also a bunch of Godzilla movies. So maybe that's why I'm such a big fan of Godzilla. It was definitely imprinted upon me at an early age. Maybe that's why I'm more of a Star Trek fan than a Star Wars fan too, because Star Trek was the first one that I watched. When I moved to Puerto Rico, I remember watching Battle of the Planets and Mazinger Z, but they were all in Spanish. So Battle of the Planets, it's called G-Force also. So I would hear it as Forza Hey. So that's kind of funny.
Still, I would have loved to have been able to have watched Mazinger even without the language. It would still have been great to see that animation as a kid. I did see Battle of the Planets, but those types of cartoons where they'd show up usually not on a network television show, but a syndicated show. So they'd pop around the schedule. A lot of markets didn't get them. I lived in a smaller market in Minnesota, so we did get some of them. We got obviously Voltron and stuff, but it was becoming bigger back then. Mazinger was really kind of one of those earliest ones that anime shows that came over. That was cool that you at least got to see it, I guess.
True. And who could forget, as Alex mentioned, like Transformers and G.I. Joe. Those were huge back in the day. I also remember watching Three Stooges and Popeye. There was sort of a block when I was a kid, so I would watch those together. Those were really fun to watch.
Oh yeah,
You remember that, Alex?
yeah. Also, and Little Rascals too was another
Oh
one I
yeah,
used to
you're
watch.
right. Little Rascals. But I'm also a huge fan of Magnum PI and I Love Lucy. Those are probably two of my most favorite shows ever to watch. Um, and then did you mention Robotech, Alex? Because I know that had been.
No, there's a lot I didn't mention,
Yeah.
like Speed Racer. I
Oh
forgot to
yeah,
do
Speed
that.
Racer.
Star
Right.
Blazers.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
love Speed Racer.
Yeah,
Speed Racer was awesome.
yeah, you can tell that Japanese animation had a big influence on all of us.
Yeah, I actually really loved even the Speed Racer live action movie they made, last decade or so ago. I mean, if you're
the Wachowski brothers, right?
yeah, well, siblings.
Oh yeah, exactly. They're no longer brothers.
It's true. They were at the time, so technically that is correct. But
okay.
yeah, that was a total love letter to the cartoon, the original cartoon. You could tell that they were fans of the original cartoon and wanted to bring as much from the original and keep it as faithful to the original. There were so many little elements there that I just thought they kicked it out of the park.
Yeah, it was so hyper dynamic and in your face that everything just popped. You're right. It was so extravagant, and I enjoyed it. I know a lot of people didn't for some reason, but I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, it was really unfortunate to see it flop so hard at the box office, but it's so cool that they got to make it. And, it's like, because they could have, just done what the studio wanted to do. If anyone else had done it, it would have been a much more traditional, kind of cash in regular movie that just kind of tips its hat to the source material here and there. But they really made that a living cartoon. It's really, really a cool movie, and glad we have it, even though it didn't do well.
It's kind of funny that you bring up. Well, that we bring up a Speed Racer. We segue from the anime to the movie because my good friend Ryland Grant, he's a writer. He writes comic books, but he also is a pretty prolific screenwriter for movies and TV shows. And one of his scripts, I guess, is just finished wrapping up in Italy, and it stars Emil Hirsch, who was a star for Speed Racer. So,
oh wow,
yeah. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that was one of the first movies I remember seeing him in. I think he had been in a few things earlier than that, but they were, most of them were, I think, generally smaller roles or whatever. But yeah, he's become a lot bigger since Speed Racer, that's for sure.
As far as comic books go, I grew up a Marvel guy, and I read, I loved Avengers, Defenders, Iron Man. I loved Iron Man. I thought he was probably like my favorite character growing up. Ghost Rider, and also enjoyed reading the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, just collecting all those. And I remember reading all that. A perfect Friday for me would be, reading that, listening to the radio while, eating pizza. That'd be like a perfect Friday for me.
Dude, I loved that. That was one of the first comics I got. The first comics before I bought my own comics. I had gotten some comics as gifts. And one of the first ones, I got a stack of them someone gave me. And I got Marvel Universe. I think it was letter S, just one issue of it. And
it's perfect for you though, right? Because Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, Silver Surfer. It was actually a really good issue to have. And then the only other Marvel Universe I got from the original run was because it was just ending as I was starting collecting comic books. So I got the last issue, which is the issue on hardware, paraphernalia, and weapons. So instead of people in it, it was all entries like Captain America's shield and Deathlock's gun, Nick Fury's gun, Iron Man's armor, Mandarin's rings. In the second version of the Marvel Universe in the mid/late 80s, they actually combined those entries into the entry for that character. So in the 86 version of Marvel Universe, they didn't have an issue devoted to the weapons. They would just include that. So you'd have in Iron Man, in his entry, they would also include the page or pages that they would have had from the paraphernalia issue or whatever. But yeah, so I had those two issues, S and the paraphernalia, and I would take those with me when I would, go places with my parents or whatever, because one thing is a single comic book or even a couple, you can kind of breeze through them pretty quickly, but the Marvel Universes had, just complete dense text. So you could actually just lose yourself for hours paging through, learning about different characters and their powers and their origins, how they came to be. It was just, oh man, that definitely was a huge part of starting my addiction as a Marvel zombie.
Man, I think after this podcast, I want to go to my storage unit and maybe dig out some of those Marvel Universes.
Oh, I keep all mine fairly handy, even though I actually handier than a lot of my comic books, because I got so many comic books are boxed in closets. But I have my Marvel Universes fairly handy because sometimes I'll still refer back to them for research for my videos on HeroJournalism. Now, usually you can find that info online these days, so they're not quite as required to have. But a lot of times I will want to get the contemporary original, versions that they had, because sometimes descriptions and such will change over time, and so you can sometimes get a better idea by going back to the original contemporaneous source material.
Yeah, definitely. Alex, did you want to add anything?
No. Just the Marvel Universe. I think I only had the letter, just the first first issue. I think that was the only one character I remember from that one was Abomination. I think he was the first one in that.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I totally remember that. That was one of the frustrating things about that. And if you weren't buying them off the rack, my recollection is, especially for the first series, is they weren't cheap. It's like comic books when I came in, right when Spidey had his black suit, were 60 cents a pop, and for a regular sized issue. And these were more. They were like, I think $1.25.
Yeah, you're right.
I think this 86 one was more. I think it was like $1.50, $1.75, maybe $2. And then, so if you were going to go buy them bagged and boarded at your comic shop, you're talking like, anywhere from $2 to $6. Like some of them would be, would go up in value or whatever. And so I would always try to snap up any one that I could find that was affordable. If you ever saw one in the quarter bins or whatever, but I only ever got, a handful of issues from the first run. So when the second run came out, I was still collecting comic books. I quit a little bit after that, but I was like, oh, I definitely absolutely have to, get this series and buy it off the rack, so I don't have the same thing that happened to me the last time where I couldn't get the issues because then I couldn't afford them.
Yeah, I totally feel that. I totally understand your pain, man.
It's the travails of collecting comic books.
Yeah,
because if you have an issue that's this is a classic comic book collecting problem. You have an issue or two that you want to buy every time you go to the shop that is like a special issue. If it's a double-sized issue, if it's or an anniversary issue, if it's in the 90s, there were a lot of issues with special covers that made them more expensive. Chromium covers, all the speculator stuff that they did, and so it's like one of those extra cost issues took a serious bite out of your weekly comic book budget. So. It was like kind of like I remember there were times when the new Marvel Universe came out in 86 or 87, and I'd be picking up that issue and realizing, oh man, that means I got to put back, like two two more of these cool issues that I found in the quarter bin, and I know they won't be here when I come back next time. And, the Marvel Universe might be here when I come back the next time, and, trying to weigh that little comic book version of Sophie's Choice.
So that's when you try to do more chores around the house to get an increase in your allowance.
Yeah, well, my comic shop was like a mile or two away, or it was probably more like 2 miles away, and I had to walk there. So it was like to go back and get more change because you realized you wanted to buy an extra issue was kind of a little bit of a difficult stretch to make. But sometimes you try other tricks though, like you'd put the issue that you want, you'd hide it. So you put it all the way at the back of the box, or maybe you pull it out of the M section for Marvel Universe, and you'd put it in the Z section where you'd think no one would look for it. And then you come and then you come back next week, and you look to see if it's still there, and it probably isn't. It's been refiled. They found it, or someone else found it, and put it in the right spot or bought it or whatever. But yeah, I remember all those tricks and problems of the old early comic book days when my comic book collecting budget was basically whatever change I could scrounge together, during the week. And at the end, hopefully it was at least a couple of bucks worth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not sure if I mentioned Battlestar Galactica, the show, earlier, but Battlestar Galactica was a show that got me into comic books because I would go to the local 7-Eleven frequently, and one day I noticed the spinner rack of comic books that they had, and lo and behold, there was a Battlestar Galactica comic there. So
I think that's from Marvel.
Yeah, from Marvel. So I think tie-ins are important. They should probably do it more often.
Oh, definitely. I'm a strong believer in that. And tie-ins in the other direction too, where, the adaptations, that's a big part of why I became so, interested in comic book adaptations. It really started with me getting exposed to superheroes from cartoons. And it's funny, in my interviews with a lot of comic pros, they're not as interested in other mediums outside of comic artwork, at least the artists, and so I've been surprised several times when I've talked to them, and they kind of were dismissive of these adaptations, especially early adaptations, before, the days of the MCU when everything is so high quality. And so everybody's generally universally loves, what they're doing with it. Back in the 70s and 80s, the stuff was a lot cheaper, chintzier. It wasn't very well respected by the mainstream, but still, those are the cartoons. Like Alex mentioned Super Friends, I would argue, Super Friends, often throughout its run wasn't that great of a cartoon. I think that, one of the cartoons I grew up on was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And I thought that cartoon was, it also has its flaws too. It's a product of its time, but much more of a sophisticated story and characters than what you got with Super Friends. With Super Friends, the characters were very two-dimensional. You never really knew much about, who they were as a character, like their private identities and such, as you did with Spider Friends. But anyways, I found that many comic pros kind of were dismissive of that. I interviewed John Romita, and I put that into a video, or I don't know if this actual quote made it into that video, but I've done a couple videos on John Romita and his work on Spider-Man, and his thoughts on some of the adaptations like Spider Friends and the 1977 Spider-Man live action TV show. I've got that up in one of my videos, and when in that interview, when I talked to him, he pretty much said what the general line was from comic artists was that their opinion was it's a blip. It results in a little blip of comic sales, but it always goes away. So the way they looked at it was they never saw it as that it built long-term comic sales, but they're thinking of the absolute immediacy. When that mindset is, he's thinking, I'm doing a book next month. Is that going to sell more because of this cartoon or something? And generally, no, it wasn't. But that cartoon made me become a fan of superheroes. And I ended up becoming a comic book collector. It just took 4 years for that to actually mature to happen. And then I collected, my first stint of collecting comic books was generally about 1983 to 1987. So I picked up hundreds and hundreds of comic books over that time period. And the process started with watching those cartoons. So I think a lot of times the comic pros themselves don't really understand or realize the impact and how that synergy between the two mediums can work. And I think that's the same thing with what you're saying about Battlestar Galactica. Star Wars comics from Marvel was also a big one that brought people into comic shops. And in the 80s, G.I. Joe comics was a huge element that brought people to the medium as well. So and of course, Battlestar Galactica is just a great property, period. I mean, the show, again, has some flaws, but just that was one of the coolest things ever when that came out. I mean, some of the greatest sci-fi vehicle design and character design. I mean, the Cylons and the Viper ships.
Oh yeah, I love the Vipers, man.
Still to this day, I think some of the greatest designs in sci-fi movies or TV history.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Yeah, those are all awesome points. I guess we can fast forward a little bit to when I guess we're a little bit older. I'm kind of interested to sort of look back on how we all know each other. Like, how did we all meet? I guess we'll start with Alex.
As far as you or Jason or both?
You can start with me first.
I think, yeah, we met, I think it was your freshman year in college at San Diego State. You came in with a bunch of guys from high school that you all knew each other. And I guess we were just down in the bowling alley in the student union. And I think that's where I met most of you guys.
Dude, I loved the bowling alley at college. That was always awesome. They always had a line of video games there. Did you guys play video games at the bowling alley?
There were video games there too.
What was the big game at the alley when you were there?
I think Mortal Kombat just came out during that time period.
That's what I remember from college too. I remember going down to the fast food joint in the student union, like you said, and I would grab a burger combo meal and I'd take it over to the bowling alley and I'd find a table close to the Mortal Kombat arcade and I would just sit and watch people play. And I just loved it. The characters looked so cool, even though this is really before I even started playing it myself. I just loved watching it because it was so badass.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I wish they handed out bachelor degrees in Street Fighter 2 because I would have graduated like top honors.
Summa cum laude.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think when I met Jason, it was during I forgot what year, but it was during Comic-Con, and I was hanging out with Aaron, and you said you were going to meet a friend or coworker, and I remember it was just in a sidewalk patio in downtown San Diego during Comic-Con. It's when I first met Jason. I think he was freelancing for, was it Comic Book Resources?
Yeah. For a handful of years, I was doing stories for them at Comic-Con. So I'd go down there, I'd run around, do a couple stories for them, and then spend the rest of my time trying to get interviews, for my channel, for the documentary work I do on HeroJournalism and stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I remember.
Yeah, and I guess I remember meeting Jason for the first time. I used to work at a company called Skyline San Diego. It's a trade show marketing company, and Jason's brother or brothers worked for that company. I guess they co-owned the company, and Jason, I guess, came over to San Diego from Minnesota, and that's where I met him. I think that was probably back in was it 1999 or something like that, Jason?
Yeah, it would have been the end of '99, and I it's funny because I wouldn't know this exactly except for a specific reason because we had kind of timed it because I wanted to make it down in time for my niece's birthday, which was the same day as my birthday, October 7th. So I know it was October '99. I think I started at Skyline the following week. So yeah, it would have been right around mid 1999.
Yeah, those are some awesome times. I think I was there for probably almost 3 years.
Yeah, and it's funny how happenstance that is, how you meet people and how, I mean, heck, I met a lot of people that first day at Skyline, but you're one of the people that, we've, found so much in regards to comics and art to bond over and have become friends, long term since we both left Skyline and it's always, it's cool to me that you guys like to cover Comic-Con and these related topics too, because it's always great to see you guys down at the con and collaborate whenever we can. So it's cool how things work out.
Yeah, definitely. It's always awesome when you can find something that you're totally into and sort of pursue it as I guess that's something you really want to enjoy and share with other people. Hopefully we can monetize all the stuff that we do so that we can make our passions into an actual, I guess, job.
Right on.
Yeah, I mean, why do both of you like or enjoy being content creators? Alex?
I guess going to Comic-Con for so many years, it kind of got stagnant for me. So when we finally started doing HallH.com, it's like refreshing to go to a convention, with a different perspective instead of just collecting exclusives, walking around the exhibit floor. So going to the different panels, talking to artists, talking to creators was so refreshing, and it's good change of pace of just going as an attendee and a fan. Yeah,
Jason.
Oops, sorry about that. I was muted. Yeah, for me, I think a big part of it is, that original love that you have for the material. It's and especially when, the types of entertainment that we are enthusiasts of are the types of entertainment that have been the most, dismissed and looked down upon in mainstream culture. And so by shining more of a light onto these corners of pop culture history, I think you're kind of elucidating a lot of people as to the interesting elements, the merits, the artistic value of the material itself. And I think then after that, a big part of it for me was studying journalism in college. Right around the time that I was studying journalism in college, Batman the Animated Series came out. And then right after that, X-Men the Animated Series came out. And those shows were so great, and they brought me back to the superhero cartoons of my youth. And I suddenly wanted to watch some of those again, and I found that it was impossible to do because this was really at the beginning. This was before actually the DVD era. So all you could watch was what you could find on television. Cable was definitely a thing, but still fairly limited compared to nowadays. Obviously, there was no streaming, no DVD, or you could get it on VHS if they released it on VHS, which they often did not do for these types of shows. So I went on this mission where I started trying to collect any of these old cartoons that I could find. And I started a videotape collection so that I knew that I would have these if I wanted to, go back to them, refer to them, analyze them, if I was comparing different superhero adaptations, different superhero cartoons, that type of thing. And as I started amassing a bigger and bigger collection of dozens and dozens and dozens of videotapes that had cartoon episodes, ranging from the previous decades. So from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I started, again, I was taking journalism at the time. And also in my film classes, we did a class on the adaptation process called script to screen, adapting from books, short stories, poems, plays, all the different things inherent in adapting from one medium to another. And so I just started formulating some of these analysis of different ways that some of these characters, comic book superheroes, had been adapted into different formats. At first, mainly cartoon, but also into the live action realm as well. And so, that was really kind of what started it for me. And I think a big part of what continues to drive me for it now is discovering new things about the history of genre entertainment and putting into context both history and more contemporary elements of this genre entertainment. So it's like I really love trying to discover new things about this material, even if it's material that's been around for 30, 40 years or whatever, to discover new elements of the history or new ways that it relates to the types of stories that we're looking at today. So I don't know, it's just trying to find new things. When I have someone that comments on one of my videos and says that they had learned stuff that they did not know previous or hadn't considered, or theories that they hadn't considered, that to me is the coolest thing ever. And that's kind of what continues to drive me in being a content creator.
I share those same feelings. I remember going to, I think it might have been DesignerCon or it might have been a WonderCon, when somebody came up to me. I didn't know this person. I guess they may have recognized me from one of my social media posts, but they listened to the podcast or one of the episodes, and they said thank you. And I said, for what? It says, and they said, yeah, thank you for putting. I think it was David Pepos on the podcast. He was talking about his comic book Spencer and Locke. The person said, yeah, if it wasn't for your podcast, I wouldn't have never known about Spencer and Locke. And that person said, it's one of my favorite comic books now. So, wow, I was just so totally blown away by that moment that it just made everything that we do just so much more worth it. It doesn't matter to me if we get thousands and thousands of likes or followers. If I can just help one of the if I can just, extend the reach of the creators that we interview just by a little bit, I think that's just so awesome,
Yeah, I think that one thing that is a commonality between what you guys do and what I do, and I think this is also just in general something that's common among many critics or scholars or academics, is that we really have a passion to shine a light on stuff that people didn't know about, certain works that people didn't know about, reasons why those works are interesting or artistically attractive. You guys do a lot to shine a light on lesser known creators. One thing I try to do is shine a light on lesser known aspects of comic or film or TV history. I think it's also very common as a content creator. There's a lot of content creators that follow the trends, and it's always great to produce content that happens to relate to something that's really hot, and then your content, gets some of that hotness and explodes or whatever. But unlike some people, I'm still just driven towards that exploration, even though it may be a little bit more off the beaten path and thus not quite as, a trending topic, something that's just going to cash in and and get you those clicks or whatever. So it's tough sometimes, but I think there's such a commitment there to, I don't know, I guess you'd call it, to the art, to the art of what we're doing, because, even though what we're doing is covering people that do actual art, there is an artistry even, to what we're doing as well. So, I really just, have a passion for those obscure little corners of pop culture history that are often just so overlooked. I think I had mentioned to you previously, I did a video on the mechanical versions of Pong a few months back. And, I was doing research and I was just blown away that there were so many instances I had found throughout gaming history where they were basically making mechanical versions of Pong. And in a lot, or several of them were actual attempts to just make cheap knockoffs of the video game Pong and cash in on the Pong success. And do it through mechanical ways, which, is a lower cost a consumer product. And, definitely not a huge, trendy video for the channel, but I just thought it was such a fascinating part of gaming history that I was driven to put that video out. And of the people that have watched it, one thing is it's a longer video. It's a very in-depth documentary, for at least for YouTube standards. And, I get a lot of that feedback, that people saying, wow, this had stuff in it that I'd never heard of before. And, again, that's a kind of reaction that I just love to get. That's what drives me.
Yeah, definitely. I totally love that feeling, that satisfaction of providing value for something that you did. Yeah, and I'm totally honored to have Jason here, just because, for one, I can listen to him pontificate about anything for hours. And plus he's just, he's just sharp, and he's really knowledgeable about pop culture in general, which is why I love collaborating with him. And he's probably our, I guess, our most frequent guest. I think last count, I'm thinking maybe 7 or 8 episodes.
Wow, it adds up quickly. I didn't realize it was quite that many. I know it was, it's very, at least a handful. So, well, thank you. I'm honored. I always love, meeting up with you guys at the con, collaborating on the podcast. I'm so thrilled that you guys are 100 episodes in and going strong. And it's just been fun to be a part of it and to interact with you guys, and also learn from you guys too, because you guys are so dialed into the indie comic community, much more than I am. And so it's every time, I either meet up with you guys or am doing the podcast, I'm learning some things too. So I love it. So thank you. I'm honored to hear that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the feeling's mutual. We just love having you here.
Thank you.
I guess we can sort of fast forward a little bit and go to the origin story of HeroJournalism. I'll have Alex go into this, because he's the one responsible for everything. So, Alex.
Let's see. I guess it was it 2014, probably spring or early summer.
Mm-hmm.
We're just hanging out, and I guess something came up, and I mentioned that I had HallH.com domain name, and I was just sitting on it for a few years. I believe I got it registered in 2011, I believe.
And what year was this that you guys were having the conversation again?
2014.
Oh, wow. So you had it for like 3 years, and you just kind of dropped that in conversation. Hey, did I tell you that I have HallH.com? Yeah. Meanwhile, there's someone for 3 years has been in the Comic-Con office just pulling their hair out because that domain isn't available. Love it.
And I brought it up, and you want to tell the rest?
Sure. Yeah. This was June of 2014.
Yeah. Okay.
Obviously, Comic-Con takes place in July, so we had about a month to get ready. So I briefly did some research online, learned how to do the basics of WordPress, put a site together, started doing research on what we could cover online. Obviously, both Alex and I, and there's actually another co-founder. His name is Ed Santos. Um, but yeah, we did some research online, and we were all working, and we kind of figured, you know what, we're not going to have the time to maybe cover the mainstream stories. So we're going to concentrate on what we know. And for us, Comic-Con is all about, Artist Alley and small press. So we kind of decided that'd be our focus, putting the attention on a lot of the artists that, don't get the attention that they deserve. I remember one year, I grew up also reading Silver Surfer, and Ron Lim is a famous illustrator that was involved with Silver Surfer. And I remember one year his table was pretty much empty. There's hardly anybody in line at his table, and I thought that was a travesty. So, that reminded me that, hey, we should focus on Artist Alley. So that's what we did. And so my research online had that in mind. So I was looking up artists, not just ones that would be at Comic-Con, but obviously when you do research online, you sort of go through different rabbit holes and you learn new things. In 2014, I learned about a group of artists. They're global, called Poster Posse. And being a graphic designer, I work in Illustrator. Illustrator is a program that deals with vector art. So one of the first artists that I ever came across while doing research online was an artist named Orlando Arocena. He goes by Mexafunk online. And I swear, any good, capable vector artist, what that person can do in 6 days, Orlando can do in maybe 6 hours. He's just that good and fast. He's incredible. I don't know how he does it. I think he made a deal with the devil or something like that.
Yeah, I remember it was it Planet of the Apes?
Yes.
Movie vector art that he did was that was like I think that's still my favorite one he's done.
Oh yeah, and I think that might have been the first thing we ever shared.
Yeah, I think that
online.
was the first one too.
That reminds me of some stories. First off, just how you guys were scrambling to get everything ready for Comic-Con once you decided, hey, let's do this Hall H thing, and it's only a month away. Okay, oh geez, what do we got to do to get ready for it? That reminds me of 2017 Comic-Con for me, because I had been planning my YouTube channel for several years, but I was just putting it off. I mean, because there were several things that looked like they were going to be really big hurdles for me, because I was like, thinking about, having to get a new computer, something that I could edit video on, camera, sound. I was thinking about all these different things or whatever. And so I just used that to keep putting it off. And then finally I realized, I'm like, this is crazy. I have to get this started. And so all of a sudden Comic-Con 2017 was coming up, and I'm like, okay, I've, in the interim, I have gathered a lot of what I needed to get started. I had a camera, so I'm like, okay, this is I got to get this, business card set up. I actually put out a video on YouTube. I had to actually, cause I'm like, how can I go up to people and say, yeah, I got this YouTube channel, and they go to the YouTube channel and I don't have any videos up yet. So I'm like, okay, I have to race to get my first video out before I go to the Comic-Con or whatever. So I can totally relate to what you're saying about that. And about the Artist Alley story that you had with Ron Lim, I had a very similar story. I've actually had this happen several times, but probably the biggest time that I remembered was when I think it might have been the first year I was down at Comic-Con, and I was with my girlfriend who was working the camera for me while I was getting interviews. And we were in Artist Alley, standing there during a down moment. And I go, look at that guy over there who's got no one at his table. And she's like, who is he? I go, that's Carmine Infantino. And I knew she wouldn't know who he was. So I'm like, this guy, revolution, this guy kind of like almost, created or was a big part of the, creating the Silver Age. He created the Silver Age Flash, legendary artist and editor at DC or art director. And so she looks back to me and she goes, why don't we go interview him? And I'm like, I wouldn't know what to ask him. I really don't know that enough about his history. I mean, when I look back, it was kind of stupid. I should have just gone for it and stumbled through it. And like I do with a lot of my interviews anyways, and, get something usable out of it maybe. And, or if nothing else, had a chance to talk to the legendary Carmine Infantino. But I had several of those that I just regret so much. Murphy Anderson, I don't know if you know who he is. He was a Golden Age artist at Marvel, I believe, and just known for like this just gorgeous fine line artwork. And I had, again, and I knew even less about the Golden Age than I did about the Silver Age. I mean, actually, I knew fairly good amount about Marvel Silver Age, but I didn't know as much about DC. That's why I didn't know as much about Infantino's career at the time. Obviously, I know a lot more about it now, but I had I had some comic book reference books that, historical books and stuff. And so often I'd page through the Golden Age section because I did love the artwork. I love some of that art style from the 50s comics and the pulp magazines of the 40s and 50s. So, but again, I didn't know anything about him, so I didn't go interview him. And then another one that just kills me, this one might even kill me the most, is John Buscema. Just legendary Marvel artist. Known so much for his Conan work, but I think he's actually one of the best superhero artists of all time. I mean, he's Jack Kirby, his name would be up there, but Romita has a more traditional and realistic anatomy, but some of the same types of dynamism, as they call it, that Kirby brought to it. And anyway, so again, long story short, I didn't go talk to him, but and then he died of stomach cancer, I think, just a couple of years after that. So, and I think Infantino's might have been the last time, that might have been the last year that he came to Comic-Con as well. So just really frustrating, but also like you, it really kind of instilled in me this desire, this urgency to always hit Artist Alley. And then for me, one thing I do is I look for the oldest guys at Artist Alley and I hone in on them because, those are the guys that have the most history to share. Those are the guys whose, time to visit with and meet and talk to for interviews is it's the most valuable thing. It's something that you just don't know if they'll be back to another con or if they want to stop going to cons. You just never know. So I just love getting an opportunity. One of my biggest regrets from Comic-Con shutting down in 2020 was that there were a couple comic book veterans that I was really looking forward to talking to, guys I've even talked to before, but I wanted to do new interviews. I had new things I wanted to cover with them, like Marv Wolfman and Elliot S. Magan. So those are two guys that have been at the Artist Alley for the last few Comic-Cons or couple Comic-Cons, and I was really looking forward to seeing them again. Really bummed that we didn't get the chance.
And I think your point about visiting these legendary creators, these legacy creators, I would say, is that, yeah, you're right. You just don't know if this would be their last time. I mean, to the point of how it is currently with the pandemic, when things sort of get back to quote unquote normal, will they be back to the conventions?
That is a great question because especially the older the veteran, the more vulnerable, they could be. And I listed a couple examples where it very well might have been the last time that they came to con, but even when it's not, a lot of times let's say that the person still comes to con for 3 or 4 years. A lot of times it's just something that you end up putting off. It's like you don't do it this year. Next year you actually do plan to, but then you get sidetracked by all the insanity of con that is so distracting, and then you don't get a chance and you miss that chance, and then something else happens, you're sick and you miss Comic-Con altogether the following year, and then the person isn't coming back then. So it's not always as dramatic as that's their last con ever, but you still don't know when you're going to get a chance. Sometimes they're at the con and you try to meet up with them and miss them. I've had times where I had planned on meeting with the pro and had missed them, and they were not doing their autograph alley table anymore for the rest of the con. Sometimes some of them only do it for 2 days of the whole con. You just never know. So you gotta try and seize those opportunities when you can, especially when you're talking about people that they have so much of that comic history locked into their brains.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like, I think the last convention we all went to was San Diego Comic Fest. And that's right. It was 1 week before lockdown, and there's like a couple of guests that didn't show up because from their doctor recommendation to stay home. Was it Straczynski? I think he missed out because his doctor told him not to.
And he was a featured guest of the con too. So it wasn't just like, he had rented a table and decided not to come. He was like, I think, the primary featured guest. So I'm sure the Comic Fest people were bummed about that. But I had some hesitations about going to that Comic-Con. Because all the stuff was really starting to happen that week. And I remember day by day watching the news from the weekend to Monday to Wednesday, and we're getting closer and closer to Comic Fest. And I'm like, and I started, thinking about it. I'm like, and I'm really trying to question, should I do this? And I ended up saying, we don't know how much of a threat it is. So it would seem premature to do it, to not go with what we know currently. But then within like a day or two of the Comic-Con having started, I was like, oh shit, maybe I shouldn't have. I mean, I did still come and keep coming every day till the end of the con. But as you guys remember, all hell broke loose that weekend of the con. That's when everybody started canceling. Emerald Con canceled. South by Southwest canceled. The James Bond movie was announced to be postponed from its original release date due to COVID. It's just every day, every morning at the beginning of Comic Fest, you guys and I and a bunch of others would be milling around the front lobby waiting for stuff to begin, and people would be talking about, did you hear Emerald Comic-Con's canceled? And you hear someone else go, oh my God, I hope I can get my deposit back. And, you and I, Alex, were talking about going to other cons, that just like a couple of weeks after Comic Fest. And all of a sudden it's just like conversations, like, just turn to, oh my God, nothing is going to be happening anymore. And so by the end of the con, and I just want to say, because, you mentioned the Straczynski canceling because of his doctor recommendation, there were a lot of great veteran old timers at that show. There usually is. It's a great show, Comic Fest. And I remember like by the final day, I was like, I felt a little worried, a little concerned, because I was like, as the weekend had progressed and we'd, seen how crazy things were starting to get, I was really worried that maybe one of the old guys might pick it up from the con, and thankfully no one did. There was not even a case reported of just even being sick, let alone someone dying. So that was really good news. But the last day of the con, I was in the the dealer room, and I was talking to Willie Ito. Did you guys see Willie Ito? Do you know who he is?
Oh yeah, I went to one of his panels, and he was lucky he came this year because I think he didn't come last year because he was sick. So I was like kind of pleased that he was there this year.
Yeah, Willie I had seen at the previous Comic-Con, so that would have been 2019, and then he also came to Comic Fest, and so I got to talk to him at Comic-Con, and then I got to talk to him again. I think I might have even I got to check my footage. I haven't processed all that footage yet, but I think I asked him a few more questions, but also I just remember spending a few minutes just talking to him, and I even told him, I'm like, hey, with all that's going on right now, make sure you take care of yourself and keep your distance from people, and I gave him an elbow bump, when we ended the conversation, and I left him to his table. But because of the COVID stuff or whatever. But I remember just having this concern because he's such a sweet old man, and so many great veterans were there. I was also talked to a guy that's a friend of the Hall H show, Pete Von Schally, who's a great longtime veteran that goes back, I think, at least to the to comic of the 60s or 70s. I'm not 100% sure, but he's done so much with his career. I can't say categorically either way, but there's just some really great old veterans, and I was a little bit worried about that. So I hadn't thought about that, Alex. You're right that those are the types of people who are probably going to be a little bit less likely to come, at least maybe to the first Comic-Con that opens up, and I do believe it will be, or the SDCC will be open. I don't know that there might be one that comes out earlier, but I do believe that they will make plans to return this year now that the vaccine is as close as it apparently is. So it does sound like that might be a little bit of a loss, especially for guys like you and me that love the history and love trying to explore and shine a light on the work of these great veterans.
Yeah, most definitely.
Oh yeah. I just saw a video on one of the local news stations here in San Diego about the new mayor-elect, and he wants to prepare for conventions now. So he doesn't. So as soon as we get word it's okay to open up for conventions, they're ready to go. They don't want to plan when it's okay to go. He wants to plan now and get conventions going as soon as possible.
I like that. I might be a little bit biased. Aaron, you might be a little bit biased. We worked in the trade show industry. However, we're probably more biased because of our love of Comic-Con than that. And the trade show, the relationship between San Diego, the city, and San Diego Comic-Con, and specifically in terms to the convention center and its current status and capacity and ability to serve Comic-Con, or its lack of ability to do those things, because it's becoming increasingly more difficult with the limited source or limited size and resources that the convention center can offer, and the dang city's been hemming and hawing on an expansion to the convention center for, it seems like a decade. I don't know how long off the top of my head, but they've just been going back and forth. And so while I'm sure what you're referring to is just more immediate preparations rather than an expansion, but still any kind of forward thinking approach, to it is I think a good thing. Because this stuff's eventually going to come back, and I think due to the timing, you're definitely San Diego Comic-Con's going to do it. You know what? What's crazy? I just thought of this. What if it means that Comic-Con will be really small next year? Like maybe only 60% of even attendees come. You think that's possible? Because it's been sellout. It's been a sellout every year since for almost a decade, probably. and to the point where you can't even get tickets. So can you imagine if going to a Comic-Con where it was like it had attendance levels like from 2010 or something, where it's like, so many less people? Could you imagine that?
I'm having trouble imagining it, actually. I mean, even if, okay, let's just give it, a positive spin. Like, let's just say that a vaccine is ready by December, the end of December. Like, it's totally,
okay, I think
ready to go.
That's fairly easy to assume. Go ahead.
Okay. Now, how long do you think it'll take to get maybe 40% of the population inoculated?
Well, I don't know that I can speak to a specific percentage.
Well, because they say that in order for the vaccine to be effective, we would need to at least, on a bare minimum, have 40% of the population inoculated to it sort of have a positive effect on everybody. But
so are you talking about in terms of whether people would feel comfortable to come and show up in high numbers, or are you talking in terms of whether Comic-Con would actually feel like that, that was what they would base their decision on to do the con?
A little bit of both. I mean,
well, let me answer the second one first then, because that one's an easy one to answer. It has no relation to it, because Comic-Con will have to make their decisions so far in advance that you won't know. I mean, they would have to guess or speculate like you and I are doing now, but they can't. They would not have the luxury of waiting to see how the vaccination process goes and then decide. Because by the time, even if it goes well, by the time you get to that 40%, it would be too late to start up the preparations at that point to do the con.
Well, see, that's my point though, because I think you had originally asked for next year how it would be. So for me, I think it won't be until 2022 until we can realistically think of a Comic-Con here in San Diego coming back.
Well, what if you get the vaccine? Would that be enough to make you go? Because then wouldn't you think, well, who cares if a bunch of idiots that don't have the vaccine show up and they all get it? I should be safe.
Well, I mean, getting the vaccine is one thing, but also seeing how it is, and sort of like the immediate to the long sort of the scale of it, because who knows? I mean, I've seen some research where they say that you can get the COVID again, So
oh yeah.
I'm not sure how effective the initial vaccine will be, and it's not just coming from one source either. So there's still a lot of ifs out there that I'm not.
But so that may come into play for how people will decide to go. I don't think it will come into play as much for how Comic-Con decides whether they're going to do it or not. Which is, so that kind of brings us back to my question, which is, and it sounds like you're saying that it could be a small Comic-Con then with less people showing up, maybe. Because you wouldn't show up, or maybe you're not saying. You never know, because of course there's always going to be, as we've seen from all the anti-mask weirdos and the people that are trying to flaunt the situation. A lot of people would show up anyways just because they don't care, or they're anti-maskers or whatever, regardless of the vaccine. They'd come back to Comic-Con, but other people would. Are you saying you think that that might be pervasive, not just what you would do personally?
Gosh, I'm a little bit hesitant to go to a con that allows like people from all over the world coming in without, sort of confining themselves for a few days or however long the minimum amount it takes to say that they're okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I forgot there's an international dynamic. So, but what do you think people would do? You keep saying what you would do.
I think people who are local would consider going if they felt safe to go. but people from out of city or out of state probably wouldn't feel safe enough. I don't think.
It does, seem that it'd be a little, you're spending all this money to come, airfare, hotel, all the expenses during it or whatever, and you'd be like, yeah, if you went through all that and then you ended up getting COVID, boy, that would be a pretty seemed like a pretty stupid thing that you did.
Who knows? Maybe if they can, I'm just sort of thinking off the top of my head, if they can make it safe for the creators to come, because I mean, obviously the creators are a big draw to any convention, right? Then I think there's a good chance for any convention to go on.
That's a good point, because basically the creators have veto power, and who else has veto power? The exhibitors, because the exhibitors are who pay the bills. The creators are who attract the crowds. So if they don't have companies lining up to rent booth space on the exhibit floor, and they don't have creators that are showing up to be on panels and be guests of honor and that stuff, then you definitely don't have it. So, I guess now that I think about it, it sure seems a little bit more likely than I first said that they might not do it. My theory was that Comic-Con will probably feel a lot of pressure to reopen, because just simply not, shutting down your business, as we all know from what's going on right now, hair salons, restaurants, gyms, shutting down those businesses during the quarantine means that some of them may not make it. And because at that, for all that time you're shut down, you're just losing money. You're not just losing revenue, but you're still paying bills. So you are continually losing money, and I would not be surprised if that's something that would also relate to Comic-Con. I mean, they have a little bit of a different thing. They don't have a business that operates continuously, but they do manage 3 shows a year, the big 2 being Comic-Con and WonderCon. And so for 2 years, they've had no revenue coming in from those. So, and probably still expenses. They still have people on their payroll. I guess Comic-Con should be fine. I hear they have a pretty big cash reserve, so maybe that's not an issue at all. But that was what I was thinking, is that it might be something that they feel a lot of pressure to, even if it's just a smaller con that not as many people come to still be at least doing something that brings in a little bit of revenue. And I thought they would be predisposed to doing that. This is my prediction as far as what they would want to do is because right now the predictions are that we could have 40% by June. I don't know if that'll happen, but right now with what we're hearing in the vaccines the last couple weeks, they do seem to be, at least one of them, on track to be definitely here by the end of the year, maybe in December. So, it seems like it's moving along, and there's like 3 or 4 other vaccines. So it feels like it's progressing enough that those predictions of June sound reasonable. And if that's the case, Comic-Con would probably say, well, then we definitely, ours doesn't come out until the end of July. So that's still another month, almost 2 months, later, that you would have even more of the vaccines out there. We should plan on that. But again, like I said, I think that's what they would want to do. I'm not saying it's what they'll definitely do, because in the end, it's the exhibitors and the talent, as you said, Aaron, that are probably going to be the decision makers. But I think the people would come, especially since there's so many anti-maskers out there. I think that if they got their creators and exhibitors ducks in a row, that the people would come, at least on a medium capacity.
I just had a thought. Obviously, some of the biggest way you catch COVID is by, using the same air as somebody else. So what if what if San Diego Comic-Con repurposed Petco as an outdoor event?
Wow, that's a pretty fucking cool idea. Excuse me, sorry about my language. I know we don't act blue on this show, but you just caught me by surprise. I hadn't considered that. That's a really, really interesting thing. I mean,
yeah, I mean it's a summer, so the weather should be pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like some media outlets used Petco as a venue a few years ago. So plus they have the big screen TV out there.
And then you could also use the outside area where the hotels are. I mean, they use that for the activations.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think wind is an issue. You know, a lot of people have products that, you know, might be light. A lot of people have comic books that would constantly be having their pages, you know, being, you know, battered by wind or whatever. So it wouldn't necessarily be the easiest fix. It might be a little better in Petco because you might have a little bit of a baffle barrier with the stadium itself encircling the area. So that might be more doable. Yeah, that's interesting. You know, and then have, you know, requirements on only every other seat or something like that. You know, I don't know if that's even enough, but
I mean, the sales pavilion is it has access to outside air, right?
Yeah, they could open up all those doors.
Kinda.
Yeah, they could. They've got a lot of doors on 3 of those sides.
So who knows? It was just a thought, but
no, I think that's actually a very interesting thought. I think that's a really interesting, especially if they were trying to. You know what you could do, Aaron, is imagine if you took how big do you think Petco is in comparison to the exhibit floor itself? You think it's bigger or smaller?
Oh, smaller, way smaller.
That's what I thought too. So like, just rough ballpark. What do you like? 30%, 50%? What?
Probably more 30%.
Okay, so say you took 30% of the exhibit floor and you moved it to Petco. Then you take 20% of the exhibit floor and you just remove it, period. Suddenly you have booths spread out, you know, and then maybe even, I don't know if there's any way that they could limit the traffic on it at per time or whatever, but you could see how that spreading it out, putting some of it outdoors, putting the rest of it just spread out, that might be something that would help as well. I don't know. I'm not saying that's really enough, but I think these are interesting ideas. I'm glad you mentioned that, Aaron, because you know, a lot of times there's not going to ever be any magic bullet. If they want to really do Comic-Con and people want to do it and the creators come back and the exhibitors come back, you know, they might have to think of these, you know, hate the cliche, outside the box, you know, ideas, because there's never going to be a magic bullet. Sometimes it's going to have to be a bunch of half measures that combine to be as good a solution as possible. I think that there might be possibilities there.
Yeah, because LA Comic-Con was putting out email blasts saying to buy tickets for this year because they tried to move it to December. And I guess it was a little easier for them to have a plan because they only used a small portion, probably a quarter of the LA Convention Center. And they were planning to use the whole convention center with the same amount of vendors, so everyone would be spread out.
Kind of same thing I was saying with Comic-Con
exactly.
could do, sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think they only were allowing 13,000 attendees compared to, I think, their normal 40 to 50,000 on a normal year.
Well, that's another good point is that, you know, we were asking the question, would people come? And I was thinking that generally, I think that would be lesser of a problem because there's so many people that don't care about the pandemic in the first place. But, of course, the con itself could limit that. I think that's a good point. I should have brought that up. That's something that would probably be right away something that would help that. I mean, they'd have to do some math and decide, okay, how many people would we have to have come for it to be a scaled down version to still be profitable, or at least not lose money, just still keep Comic-Con in the public and relevant at least, and see if they could make that happen with a smaller amount of attendee numbers. That could definitely help. I'd also like to point out that, have you guys heard of the Frankenstuff show? I think it's called
Frankenstein's.
Frankenstein's.
Yeah.
Okay, so you
over
have
in City Industry. Yeah.
Well, I watch a YouTube channel called The Nerd Report by Louis Lecca on YouTube, and he often goes to that show. He's based out of LA, and he's been going back to that show for months. It's one of those shows that's a regular show, like every month or something, or every so many weeks or something like that. And now I don't know what the current status is. Obviously, with the shutdowns and the open ups and the re-shutdowns, it's been all over the map or whatever. So I'm not saying that they've been going continuously, and they may be shutting down right now because we're going through a spike. But my point is they've been going with mandatory masks and stuff like that. And I've seen him do. He takes his camera and sometimes he'll stream, sometimes he'll just release it later as a video where he'll do walkthroughs and he'll talk to the exhibitors and such, and everybody's got masks and stuff. So they've been doing that. I don't know how many that they've had since the pandemic, but I know it's multiple ones because I've seen multiple videos on his channel about it. So I don't know, that might come into play here if people are already kind of doing it. If maybe any other trade shows start to make plans to open up and seem to be getting a good response from people, it's certainly possible.
Yeah, I think they moved to a new location, so I think I drove by it. I think in middle of June, and because it's right by the freeway, and looked like there was a line out the door. So I'm not sure if they're just limiting capacity. So
yeah, I've seen
looked like it's still going.
I've seen his videos start out where he's outside the venue walking in or whatever, or in line talking to some people or whatever, and definitely saw that line out the door too. I don't know. I assume that's like you did because they're limiting the capacity of the current amount of people on the floor at one time or something, but I don't know. Yeah, I guess there's still too many question marks due to whether creators would sign on for it and whether the corporate exhibitors would. So another possibility is because Comic-Con is so huge and because so many trade shows have been canceled or are on permanent hold at this point, it might be possible for them to move Comic-Con to later in the year. So imagine this. What if Comic-Con goes to November? Then you would have, 5 months after when we expect the vaccine to be, reasonably out among the public. They've been saying they expect by June. If it was November, that would give them even greater of a cushion. Because so many shows have canceled, they might not want their slots later in the year. They might not be ready to try and make a comeback. They might not be as anxious to do it as Comic-Con. So some of the more corporate conventions, might be more skittish, whereas this is a more consumer convention that might not be. That might be one way to try and make it so they could have a Comic-Con in 2021 without having to go 2 full years without a Comic-Con. What do you think of that?
That's an interesting thought, but I think Comic-Con International are sticklers for routine, and I doubt they'll budge on the dates for Comic-Con.
That may be. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, because baseball season would be going on. Well, it goes on right now, but when they have it, but that'll be another consideration, right?
I'm interested.
Yeah. Or no, baseball will be over, right?
By when?
October. Yeah, baseball would be over by then. In November.
You're right. Yeah, because right.
Yeah.
I think that it's what I'm most interested in. If I could find out one piece of data about this whole discussion, is I would want to know, what does Comic-Con think their deadline is for making a decision. So it takes, and because a trade show takes so much lead time to undertake. Aaron and I know this from working in the industry, that the companies that exhibit at the trade shows, at least the bigger ones, not the dealers and such, they're generally just bringing their product, but so that they don't need as much lead time. But a company needs to design graphics that tie into their marketing program, that are updated to whatever their current marketing message is, or whatever they're selling this year. And so they have to buy the materials, the exhibits, have their artists do this work or whatever, and then have material produced for the show. So there's a generally often at least a 6-month lead time for them to produce their booth. And so you would think that Comic-Con would have to have these commitments well in advance of July 20 or whatever the date would be for this year, but it's generally right around then. So, you'd be thinking, people would have to, be willing to pony up their money. The creators would have to be willing to commit to coming, at least you'd think by maybe February. I don't know. So I'm curious what Comic-Con would say, what the last minute they feel that they could make the decision to go ahead and do the Comic-Con, so that we kind of know, because I guess you could say by February, we'll have a lot more data than we have right now in, late November, because if the vaccine comes out in December, we'll have had 2 months of the vaccine being out and starting to see, okay, how many people are getting it. We'll know how many doses are out. We'll be able to start to make projections as far as, what was our June date, accurate? Are we safe with that? Because if things go really well, it certainly is possible that maybe companies start plunking down for their exhibit space. I don't know about the creators as much. I think that a lot of them still might be skittish, especially the older ones, as Aaron mentioned.
Yeah, I think so. I think had Comic-Con International scheduled San Diego Comic-Con traditionally maybe in September, I think that would have been enough lead time to sort of see if the vaccine that they come up with, I think they're probably thinking in early spring, right? That's when they think they're sort of confident that something might come out.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, in terms of that's like the first initial time where they think that conceivably a vaccine can come out, right?
I believe what they're saying is the latest is that it'll be out in December, but when it comes out, the first X amount of doses all go to hospital staff, emergency responders, police, that type of thing.
Right.
So it will be a period of time before any, or it'll also go to elderly people that are already sick, people in nursing homes, that kind of thing as well. So those are going to be the first people served. So it's going to take a certain amount of time to get through those. So it would probably be, and this is just pure speculation, but let's just assume it takes a month for that to happen. Well, that means in January they would be starting to open up the vaccine to the general public. So you would think it might be a good chance that by February we would at least have a month's worth of vaccine inoculations going out there to the public, and we'd be able to see and count how many doses are out there and start to get an idea of, okay, now that we're on the main public and not just on these specialty cases that were the first come, first servers, how fast is this going out? What's our plan? Also, I think the new administration will try to, come up with some new ideas to try and increase the ways that we can. It's still going to be tough, but I don't know. I'm just thinking that different ways that they can do to get the vaccine out there. I'm sure they'll be having school nurses do it to kids at school. There's been talk about drugstores doing it. Those types of non-health, non-hospital, not having to go to the doctor per se or whatever, to try and spread out to as many locations as we can. So we'll definitely have more data, at that point. But God, it feels just like this year, how everybody was like hopeful. Oh, maybe things will be better by then, and Comic-Con will still be able to go for 2020. But in this case, it just, I don't know. It just feels the same way because if it happens, it would be so close. We'd have to really be doing well by February, and then enough that it would give people the confidence to plunk down money and for creators to commit to attending. I don't know. I guess it's probably still a bit of a long shot, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading a BBC story right now, and it says that according to this article, I think they're referencing the vaccine by Moderna, that they think they can get 70% herd immunity by May. So maybe that might be cutting it too close. I don't know.
Well, that's certainly a lot higher than what you had said earlier about needing to get to 40%. I mean, if it's 70% by May, I assume they must be taking into account the other vaccines in addition to just Moderna, right? Because
probably
it sounds a little crazy that would all be one vaccine, and then all the other vaccines would just even be more immunity. I don't know, but if that is possible, you'd think that it would be going so well at the beginning of the year. Of course, another thing that's going to be tough is even if it's going really well, it'll seem like things aren't going well, because right now we're going into the flu season and we're seeing these spikes because it's not just the vaccine's normal, ability to spread, but the winter is giving it, a little bit extra, ability to do that. And of course it's winter. A lot of the country is spending more time indoors, so that increases it. And
true.
So we're seeing these spikes in hospitalizations and deaths right now. And that probably is going to continue through the winter a bit. So even if we get the vaccine and we're starting to finally make some headway, it may still kind of seem a little desperate at the moment, because we'll probably be seeing these headlines of hospitals really, really struggling with trying to keep everybody, in beds and everything. So even if we are making that headway, if it doesn't result in curving down the hospitalizations, at that time, people, might still just be too spooked by it because of what's going on at that moment, even though we have good reason to believe by summer, we'll have reached that herd immunity. So that's another thing that just might come into play. It's like, even if we're making headway, because we'll be probably in a little bit of that rough flu season period with COVID, it might make it hard for people to be confident that it'll be ready, or that we'll be okay in the summer, even if we probably will.
No, plus, like you said before, I mean, San Diego Comic-Con is just such a huge machine that they would need a lot of time to plan and make sure before they give the green light to move forward. So, between, say February and through May, I mean, does that give them enough time to really make a decision?
I think it could. If we said, is February the drop dead date? And if the problem is that even enough time to have had the vaccine out to really start to have that confidence? That's probably the bigger issue. Because
I think there's probably a couple of positives. Is that during that time period, that early part of the year, the first half, there probably won't be a lot of activity anyway. So I think there might be, a good chance that they wouldn't have to make a decision right away. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I'm not so, but the exhibitors would still need that lead time from February.
Well,
right?
true. Yeah. What I'm saying is that, yeah. I guess one scenario that I can see is that if everything goes well, then obviously near the summer and the tail end of the year, then people would probably start planning events. So I think they would probably have to try to take the lead in saying, hey, we're gonna put something on. You know.
Well, I kind of imagine a way you could make it work with the exhibitors is you go to them and say, hey, we're doing it. It's just a 6-month lead time. For a lot of companies, they would feel like that's inappropriate. They would want more time to plan their stuff. But for, as you know, Aaron, most of our clients back in the industry were, people that waited till the last minute to start dealing with it. So, I can imagine them going to exhibitors and saying, hey, listen, this is just going to be a small deal. We're going to focus on ways to mitigate and social distance. So it's going to be a small con, but you haven't been able to promote your company or your stuff at events in a long time. So, hey, it'd be a chance to still get out there, engage with the fans, but it's going to be a smaller deal. So, you don't have to feel as much pressure to have as much new booth materials, reuse stuff that you had from 2019, just get some new graphics maybe or something, and kind of convince people that, hey, we're just doing a smaller thing. And if they can, make the exhibitors feel like, okay, that's still a benefit to me to get out there and engage with the fans when we haven't been able to do so in such a long time, even if it's on a smaller scale. I can kind of imagine how that might sell with exhibitors. That probably wouldn't have any impact with the comic pros, which, as you mentioned, is another big stickler issue. But I could almost imagine, a social distanced, smaller one could possibly work. Again, it probably is a pipe dream, but I can just imagine how that could work.
Yeah, I was listening to a good friend of the show, Leonard Sultana, his show, An Englishman in San Diego, A Cup of Tea with an Englishman in San Diego. He has a live show every Sunday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. But anyway, he had a guest recently, and I think one of the things that Leonard asks, is how safe does the convention have to be before you think about going? And so I think I forgot who it was, but this person, I think he lives in England, but he's been invited to a few conventions taking place, say, in Mexico, and he's thinking about going if they get their COVID precautions in place. And I think they're thinking about putting up sort of barriers of some sort. So I'm curious if that's the case. Are you
saying kind of like the plastic barriers that they put up at at the convenience store that just hangs from the ceiling in front of you, maybe in the clerk or something like that? No,
maybe something similar. But if smaller shows, say outside the United States, are going to be doing that, then that may be a good litmus test to see how shows in the States. Because I think maybe shows in I think in the States it's a little bit more stringent just because of the amount of cases that we have here. So that'd be a good test to see what comic conventions can probably do here in the States going forward.
Man, I don't give out investing advice, but I'm starting to wish I had stock in plexiglass companies.
Yeah, but I don't want to belabor this point too long.
Right.
Too much longer, just because although it's important and it does impact the convention scene.
It's an interesting topic, and I think really why that resonated with us. Just there's so much angst around it.
There is.
I compare it to what's going on with the movie industry right now. It's kind of just freaky for me to who has been going to movies since 1976 or whatever. When I couldn't even didn't even know what was going on in the movies. it's just crazy. So it's weird to think about life without Comic-Con. I hope we can get it back. Anyways, continue on, sir.
Yeah, for sure. Well, all we can do is, hope for the best, but still make sure that we still adhere to, the COVID precautions.
Yeah, and the better we do, the more we do, the more we wear our masks, the more we get the vaccine when it comes out. The closer or the quicker we'll be back to normal. So you just got to keep your eyes on the prize and don't let it get you too down.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Let's take a quick break and jump on the Thunder Round. I guess the first question is. Comic book legend and writer Roy Thomas recently celebrated his 80th birthday. Do you have a favorite Roy Thomas story? For me, I mentioned before that I grew up a huge fan of the Avengers, and a big part of the Avengers that I remember is the Kree-Skrull War. And I know that Roy Thomas had a big hand in it, especially if you can look at, I think it was issue number 96.
Dude, I do that all the time because I study TV history so much. And so I'm always, trying to track, that happens in this episode, that happens in that episode. And so I often look, again, a lot of times it's comics, it's like, that happened in this X-Men cartoon episode, that happened in that Spider-Man cartoon episode. And so I always find myself referring to issues as episodes.
Right. So like the issues tying in the Kree-Skrull War, issue number 96, The Andromeda Swarm, which features awesome art by Neil Adams. And it showcases the Avengers during the Kree-Skrull War. And like I grew up a Vision fan, and he has a big role in it as well. So I'm just reminded of this story. And how about you, Alex? Do you have any Roy Thomas stories that you want to share?
Sorry. Actually, we didn't know Roy Thomas until recently. So you mentioned it because when I first started reading comics, I didn't pay attention to artists or writers. I just read the stories until I just recently got interested into the writers and artists just recently. So don't know too much about them actually.
Jason.
Well, I was almost going to, knowing that you were going to be delivering this question, I almost wanted to presage it earlier in the podcast, because earlier in the podcast we were talking about John Buscema. Both you and I had our different stories about John Buscema, Aaron. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I was going to say is one of the great runs, I think, that Buscema had was on the Avengers, which was largely with, and not the entire run, but largely with Roy Thomas writing. And Roy Thomas had taken over for Stan Lee, and big shoes to fill, allegedly. And he just cranked out some great stories. Now you referred to some later in the run, but one thing it was for me, I started collecting in the early 80s, and I bought a lot of Bronze Age books out of the bargain bins, the quarter bins, and I looked for anything old that I could. And for stuff like in the 60s, because I believe that's what we'd be talking about for, a lot of that run that of Roy's run following up Stan Lee would have started in the 60s and been for several years till it got in the 70s, I believe. And 60s books were actually very difficult to get because they didn't show up in the quarter bins so much, because they were a little more expensive, even if they were beat up. And so I would get them any way that I could, whether that was scrounging, finding a rare one in the quarter bin, or if it was for, buying reprints, like I would buy Marvel Tales to get old 60s Spider-Man issues. I would sometimes buy old 70s reprints of 60s issues that Marvel had put out. And those would sometimes show up in the quarter bin. So I was always trying to get that. And one of the runs that I really always wanted more of was just that, rather than the few sparse issues I could get, was that Roy Thomas, John Buscema Avengers run. I just think his art is just so amazing, and I specifically love the Ultron storyline. I'm not sure if Ultron was created during the Stan Lee run, but that's one of the cool things. Roy Thomas took a lot of, he took over a lot of books that Stan had done or whatever. So you'd think that, again, the big shoes to fill, and just was able to do some just killer stuff with those characters, including the Kree Skrull War that you mentioned. But I really like the Ultron work that he did earlier, which also was heavily related to Vision, which again, that John Buscema Vision just looked so awesome. But my favorite story about Roy Thomas is the time I got to meet him at Comic-Con. I've seen him at Comic-Con several times, but one time I was there and I was walking. It's like at the end of the day. I think we were leaving, where we were getting ready to leave to start heading towards the exits on the exhibit floor. And she was wearing this pretty badass T-shirt that was a cover of one of those classic covers of the Marvel Star Wars comics. Like might have been like the first adaptation of the movie rather than the ongoing series. I forget, but just a Luke Skywalker with, I think it might have been Carmine Infantino art, just awesome art. And anyways, we're walking down the aisle towards the exits, and all of a sudden I look up and I go, hey, that's Roy Thomas. And she's like, who's Roy Thomas? I go, he's the guy that wrote the comic book that's on the front of your shirt. And so we walked over there, and I'm like, I got to introduce you to him. I mean, I'd never met him myself, but I'm like, I just gotta, we gotta go over and say hi to him and point out. And immediately he's like, hey, I like your shirt.
That's awesome.
So that was a fun story. And she totally loved that. She's much more of an indie comics girl. And so, not as big or as knowledgeable into, traditional superhero comics. So Roy Thomas's superhero work or even his Star Wars work from the, early 1980s or late 70s was not high on her radar, but she loved that once that happened. And then we went to lunch, and she started to learn more about the books that he had done and everything. It was a really fun time.
That's awesome, bro. If you could teleport to anywhere in the world right now, where would you go, and why did you pick that place? For me, I was on Google Earth the other day, and I happened to just try to find where I used to grow up in Puerto Rico, and I found where we used to grow up, and I've been feeling nostalgic ever since. So I'd want to teleport to my old house in Puerto Rico, and just hang out there. I mean, growing up, I'd probably be at the beach almost every other day. It was like within biking distance. So those were all great memories for me. How about you, Alex?
Lately I've been watching a lot of live streamers on Twitch, and there's one guy who lives in Taiwan, and their cases of COVID is so low that it looks like last year here in the States. Everyone's out. He recently live streamed a music festival, and he mentioned that this is the only place in the world that has a music festival going on right now, and that's how well they have COVID under control. I think they have less than 10 deaths and just a few hundred cases. So Taiwan would probably be the place I want to go right now. And some of the scenery is pretty nice too. And he recently streamed at a place where Miyazaki got inspired for Spirited Away, which was in Taiwan. So that's pretty
crazy.
Cool too.
Yeah, Taiwan is definitely one of those places that they definitely have everything under control. And if you compare the size of Taiwan to California, I think Taiwan is probably barely a third the size of California. They have about 24 million people versus 40 million people in California. But what they were able to do, considering the coronavirus, is just amazing.
Oh yeah. I think it's just everyone's on board with everything they're doing, from contact tracing to wearing masks. There's no social distancing, but because they don't have to worry about it actually. So
cool. Jason.
Well, I was going to say, I wouldn't really want to teleport anywhere right now because of what's going on. And, I thought about it, and, back in the old days, one place I could think of would be to teleport to like our cabin. Because back when I was a kid, my dad was part owner of a hunting and fishing cabin that we would go to up in central Minnesota, which was, several hours north of Minneapolis metro area. And then my grandma and my uncle both had resort cabins, for more like summer swimming activities and stuff on lakes, on the same lake up in Brainerd, Minnesota, which is not quite as far from metropolitan area, but still probably 2-3 hours. Anyways, and especially as we're getting into the winter, back in the day, I bet, my grandma or uncle's cabin would not be being used once it snowed. Those are summer ones, but the hunting cabin, we'd be going right into hunting season. So that one would be totally packed to the gill, and that they sleep like, 3 or 4 or 4 or 6 to a room. So that wouldn't be a good one. But I could imagine the one at the lake for summer would be not being used, and it would be, and sometimes the lake is a cool place to be at in the winter. I never really did it, but my cousin did a lot, and there's still a lot of stuff to do there, and it's still be a nice, because I was thinking about okay, I don't want to teleport anywhere with people, so something that's like at least something that's nice and picturesque, even though it would be think and a little bit cold. But that's what I was thinking. But I have to say I'm amazed by Alex's answer, because that would definitely be something that I would have to consider, going to the one place that that's handled it well and doesn't have it. And I'd be totally willing to go through like a quarantine, after I land on the ground from the airplane trip, quarantine for a week or two if I had to. That would be well worth it. So that would be something I would have to consider. But generally, I would not be just looking to really go many places interesting right now, given the current situation.
Right. Yeah, I guess my next question is kind of weird, because I guess we'll be in the car. But if you're going on a long road trip, what songs would you put on your playlist? For me, I guess if I'm by myself, then I'd probably load up that playlist with all the songs that I sing at karaoke. That way I wouldn't. I guess I'm practicing them, and I wouldn't bother anybody. But
would you be driving alone, or would you be totally annoying whoever else is in the car?
Well, yeah. If I was by myself, I'd fill it up with karaoke songs that I sing.
That's a key notation.
Yeah. If I was driving with other people, there's a cool mix of songs on YouTube and on Spotify called Lo-Fi Chill or something like that. But it's basically,
I know what you're talking about. I think it's lo-fi hip hop, isn't that what it is? Or
something like that. Yeah, but anyways, it's really low key, down tempo music that you can listen to while you're studying, basically. So that's really cool. I love down tempo beats, and it's relaxing, but at the same time, it has something that's that'll keep your attention. So I probably wouldn't fall asleep too much. Alex.
I'll probably have like a 80s mix of music, from new wave to early rap to New Kids on the Block when they first came out. Just a mix of 80s. 80s was a interesting mix of music.
Yeah, definitely.
So
a lot of freestyle mixes that are pretty good.
Yeah, freestyle.
Jason.
Probably, for general listening, probably a little bit more geared towards 70s, 80s, and 90s music, 90s rap. But generally, not as dialed in on music. I know that lo-fi music you can study to stuff. I see those videos of just super long, multi-hour cuts of that on YouTube all the time, and I've listened to them, and I love that type of music too. And in a more modern, rap and hip hop are definitely favorites or whatever, but generally any rock. But music, I'm just not as dialed into as like the other areas of the pop culture that I cover on Hero Journalism. But one other thing I'd say is just generally what if I'm alone, I'll gravitate more towards the 70s, 80s, 90s stuff. But generally open to anything modern, if I'm with someone that wants to listen to that too. But one thing I'll also do, especially when I'm alone, is I'll bring a bunch of soundtracks into the car. I'll bring a bunch of my old soundtrack CDs, and I've got a CD player in my car, and I'll listen to Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan original motion picture soundtrack. And
oh man,
yeah,
Superman soundtrack,
fantastic soundtrack.
Yeah,
I've got a lot from
the Richard Donner movie.
Yeah,
actually, right?
Definitely. Well, you know what? That's also, they used the Richard Donner was also the theme they used for Superman Returns as well, because that movie was actually intended to be a sequel to Superman 2.
Oh yeah,
even though it came out in 2004, 20 years after Superman 2. But
I know that movie gets a bad rap, but I didn't mind it. I thought it was okay.
Yeah, I think it's got a lot of great stuff in it. I think Singer made some mistakes as well. I think that the idea of doing it as a sequel to the original was, I think, an absolute stroke of brilliance. And one of the coolest things ever to have a sequel to a movie that long ago, and that guy they cast, Brandon Routh, just looked.
Yeah, he did.
Looked like like Christopher Reeves or whatever, but he was too slavish with it, so that he, what did he do? He basically had some script beats, some story points that he thought were homages to the original, but was just brought it in a goofy territory, and so it's got some flaws. But a lot of the stuff it did was fantastic, and that original concept to do it as a sequel was fantastic, and there was just some great Superman stuff in there. But it does have some flaws. But so in a way, that would be the same score, because, like I said, it's at least for the theme they used the John Williams work, and most of the actual score throughout the movie was also influenced by that.
Did you happen to watch the last Crisis on Infinite Earths on CW, where they actually used Brandon Routh's Superman?
I watched I watched a little bit of it. I watched the part where Superman went evil. Is that, what I'm talking about?
Actually,
and he fights Supergirl, and I think he fights the Superman of the CW universe. Is that the episode you're talking about, or does that happen later?
Well, I don't know. A lot happens. I'm losing track of
okay,
exactly
gotcha.
Happened,
well, the one I saw, he wears the Kingdom Come looking suit.
Maybe that's what it was. It was my bad. It was a Kingdom Come Superman that he portrayed.
Okay, right, yeah. But they are saying, no, you're right though. They are saying in that continuity that it's that Superman that becomes the Kingdom Come Superman. It's a Christopher Reeve Superman that becomes the Kingdom Come Superman. I thought I read that somewhere.
Okay.
So it is. So you are right that he was playing that in the thing. It's just, it was a melding of Christopher Reeves and the Kingdom Come comic continuity. Yeah. So love the 90s superhero scores. I've got several of the 90s Batman scores. In fact, I think I've got all the Batman scores from the 90s, including Mask of the Phantasm and the Schumacher and Burton movie scores. Just love those. The Shadow is an absolutely fantastic, underrated score. Have you guys ever seen The Shadow with Alec Baldwin?
A long time ago.
Oh, it's such a cool score. It's like it's got a lot of just interesting. There's some Eastern influences in the score because in the movie, he gets trained in Tibet, I think, in how to use his powers or whatever, and just fantastic. It's by Jerry Goldsmith, the guy who did
Star Trek.
Yeah, he's done so many things. It's almost crazy he's basically only John Williams has done more than he has.
Yeah.
Just fantastic.
Star Trek, the Waltons, and a whole slew of other ones.
Oh yeah, you're right. That's crazy. That's an off the wall one to mention. I mean, I didn't know that before you mentioned that, but it's like, wow, that would still obscure. I remember watching that show as a kid, but I was like super young. I just barely even. It would have been like one of the first TV shows I watched or whatever. But yeah, that's hilarious. But his score is so fantastic. And one of the things was it came out in the 90s and I bought it because I love that movie, bought it right away. And I used it all the time. I don't know if I've told you this, Aaron, but I used it all the time when I would check out silent movies from the library at my college. A lot of times they would not have any soundtrack on. Obviously, there's no original soundtrack. They were silent movies, so it didn't come with the movie. But sometimes they'd put music on it, that just they grab it from whatever. Sometimes they would have nothing, and sometimes the music they'd pick would be terrible. And Jerry Goldsmith's Shadow score, the movie takes place in the 30s or 40s, I forget, and so it's got a very period piece feel to it. And so for many movies, I watched them with The Shadow as my musical score.
Nice.
I actually recently was listening to a podcast or a video on YouTube or something where the guy was recommending against doing that because he said you're mixing up. It's like, the music, certain music will evoke a thought of something certain, but when you have that same music that you're using for multiple movies, you're mixing up those evocations, I guess. I don't know. I had never thought about it that way, but because I loved it, I thought it worked out great in my 90s days when I was studying silent films.
Yeah, I when I was going to art school, I was in a multimedia class, and I did like a mock-up trailer, and the movie I used was Braveheart, and I love the score for Braveheart, the music that was in there.
Braveheart was definitely. I mean, love or hate Mel Gibson, it was just had a lot of solid elements to the production, and it just a really lush production design, score, definitely.
I think it was Horner, right? James Horner?
James Horner. He's so freaking awesome. He's the guy that did Star Trek II Wrath of Khan. And it was funny.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I didn't either for a long time, even though I had the damn, soundtrack. I think I usually play a copy of it. I bought the soundtrack, but I would often make copies of my CDs because a lot of times I'd scratch them, especially if I was, using them in the car. So the only reason why I mentioned that is because so that it didn't have the label on it, so I wouldn't, and I think he uses the same opening theme that Goldsmith does from Star Trek the motion picture. And so for a long time I was listening to it thinking it was a Goldsmith score, and then I was like, oh my god, what an idiot. It's of course it's Horner. But yeah, that soundtrack is so epic. There are certain, tracks that I would listen to that are just get me jazzed. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to go back and find this or dig it out of my DVD shelves and watch this scene again because this music is just so compelling.
For sure.
I hate that everybody, he really became famous after Titanic, which I'm like, yawn, Titanic, who gives a rat's, but dude, I'm like, this dude's done some legendary stuff. You know what else he did that's legendary in B movie circles is Battle Beyond the Stars. Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard of it. Remind me what that movie was about.
It was, okay. This is a coincidence. It stars John Boy from Waltons. That's a weird coincidence. I didn't even realize that when I was bringing it up. Is that crazy? Battle Beyond the Stars was a movie around 1980. My dad took it to me when I was like 7, 8 years old. And it was basically a low budget Roger Corman sci-fi movie that was kind of a space themed ripoff of the Magnificent Seven, where this John Boy from the Waltons has to his planet's being threatened, and he has to gather together 7 mercenaries that he can hire to help defend him against the good guys. So in the Magnificent Seven, it was 7, cowboys or bounty hunter cowboys or whatever they were in that movie or whatever. And and it was an absolutely fantastic movie. It was probably the best Corman movie ever made. I mean, he's known for having struck lightning a few times, but amongst a lot of really schlocky stuff that's still loved by a lot of people, but it's loved for the schlocky parts or whatever. Battle Beyond the Stars was actually a really solid sci-fi film. He had, I think it might have been written by John Sayles, who was like an award-winning writer who got, was one of the, Corman had a lot of guys who got their start working for him and then, would leave once they could get, good jobs or whatever, but they would still do quality work. And James Cameron was in the art department and did a lot of the special effects for it. It was one of his first projects. The cast is absolutely astounding. It's got Robert Vaughn, George Peppard. The list goes on. I could, keep naming people if I had, realized I was going to bring this topic up, but it was a really fun sci-fi movie. And one of James Horner's first jobs was doing the score for it. So it had a kick-ass score. In fact, Corman would often use the score for trailers of movies, that he would do later. In fact, I think he might have even just ripped off the whole score once for one of his future movies as well, or something like that. But that James Horner score was really good, and that was just a real classic, low budget sci-fi, but really good, a lot better, than it should have been for the budget that, Corman and the type of quality Corman normally deals with. And again, just crazy that he got this all-star cast, people a little bit at the end of their career, Robert Vaughn, George Peppard, but we're still kind of big names and really good actors and such.
Yeah, that's probably before Peppard did A-Team, huh?
You know what? I bet it is. And you know what? I mean, he was a movie star. He probably did. I guess he did. Banachek was a show he did or whatever. But A-Team. That sometimes that leads an actor who does a little bit more highfalutin stuff. It'll lead them to more genre work when they're sometimes when they're maybe their career isn't at their strongest. And he was definitely towards the end of his career at that time. But that was I love how that worked out. Because I always felt that he was kind of a pretty classy actor to have on. It was basically a kids' guns action show.
Yeah, I mean, I remember him from I think. Breakfast at Tiffany's, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. But he did a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
The lesser problematic part of Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Oh yeah, of course. But that's a whole nother podcast.
Even his half is kind of problematic too, isn't she? Is she a prostitute in that? I forget. I don't know. It's been so long since I've seen it, but whatever. There's an arrangement between them, I think, isn't there? Or they're trying to,
something like that. Something like that. I guess the next question is, what's one thing your fans would be surprised to know about you? I mentioned Battlestar Galactica earlier, and one of the characters on there, he didn't have a huge part, but he played a pilot. He actually played Apollo Apollo's younger brother, a famous guy named Rick Springfield. He played Apollo's brother, and he was on a show called General Hospital. I grew up watching General Hospital, and I became a fan of the show, and I became a fan of Rick Springfield. So I guess that's something that a lot of people that know me probably don't know.
Well, I have a similar little tangential connection. I had one of the professors at St. Cloud State, where I went to college, was basically a red shirt on Star Trek.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was tried to be an actor for a little while and did an episode or two of Star Trek. And I knew who the guy was, but I always regretted not really. It was before I kind of started, the concept of hero journalism. But he was a guy I totally wished he'd gotten an interview with. And then another one was Joel and Ethan Cohen's mom worked at St. Cloud State as well. The Cohen brothers.
Oh, wow. That's
film
awesome.
directors. Yeah, is that crazy? Small world, huh?
Yeah. Alex.
Yeah. Something fans would be surprised to know about me. One thing is I've been to North Korea. Actually, I think it was
was this with
2005
with Dennis Rodman or
no, that's Dennis Rodman in that one. It was in 2005, and we took a trip to the Philippines for a friend's wedding. And as a side trip, we wanted to go somewhere else in Asia. And a lot of people went to Tokyo or Japan at the time, so we decided to go somewhere different. And so we decided to go to Korea. And it was just a week over there. But this was a time before K-pop was popular, before K-dramas were popular, and it wasn't a high tourist place to go. And we decided to do a trip to the DMZ, and back then the tension wasn't that high, so they're doing tours, and we did and then one of the places we went to was I think it was called the Joint Security Area, and they have a building where they have meetings between the North and South, and in the middle of that building runs the border, the line, and in the middle of that building is a table, and the table sits right halfway between North and South Korea.
So they can meet without having to cross into the other country, huh?
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. And we were allowed to go in there, take pictures, and it was cool stepping all the way in North Korea and having one foot in North Korea and one foot in South Korea. So that was an interesting trip.
Oh, that's funny. That's like that place in America you can go where I think it's in the Southwest where it's called 5 Points, where 5 states converge at one point. You can take 5 steps and be in 5 different states in each step.
I thought it was four states. Okay. It was like Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico.
That totally may be. It's been a long time since I had heard about that place, but
yeah, I heard about that place too. That'd be a cool place to visit.
That'd be an awesome road trip. We could all take it together. Hopefully you guys like my karaoke mix. No, I was joking.
I'd been planning to try and do a road trip into Arizona, and I was even considering New Mexico. I'm sure your listeners know we're all based out of San Diego, and so it's not too far. But I was looking for other conventions to do, and me and Alex were talking about this a little bit back at Comic Fest, because you and I were talking about going to a video game convention.
Arcade.
Right, which is
Arcade
where?
Expo. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In Banning. It's just right before Palm Springs.
I had told you, I think I had told you at the time, I was trying to do a plan a trip, and of course then COVID happened, obviously. But what I was trying to do was I wanted to go to that convention. That's why I was so excited to hear you were going to be there as well, because I was going to go there, continue on after that to Vegas, hit the Pinball Museum, and then swing down into Arizona, visit my dad and my stepmom, and then possibly, I think I was looking at locations in like Phoenix or whatever that I wanted to check out, some maybe classic arcade spots, or time it with the Phoenix Comic Convention. And then I was also looking at that New Mexico Comic Convention as well. So yeah, that's an area that I've already was considering on doing a little bit of road tripping into.
Yeah, that's cool. Hey, when things start opening up again, there's one in New Mexico called Indigenous Con, where it's like Native American influenced comic convention.
I'd never heard of that. So that's interesting.
Yeah. It's only been doing it for a few years, so, and I think they expanded to Australia too.
Interesting.
So So when things open up again, that's definitely one I want to go to.
Let's add that to the list.
Yep.
Cool. What kind of character would you be on The Mandalorian? When I put this question as part of the Thunder Round, I was thinking about it, and one of my favorite shows to watch on Netflix is a show called Midnight Diner. And it takes place in Tokyo, and it's basically a 12-seat izakaya that opens up at midnight. And the guy that runs it, he's sort of mysterious, and you kind of think that maybe he was part of the Yakuza or something. Well, that's the impression that I got. And anyway, he turned over a new leaf, and he became like a cook, and he owns this little eatery that serves people that work late or start early in the morning, depending on what kind of job you have. So the place is open from midnight to 7 a.m. And so each episode deals with somebody that comes in, and they have some sort of backstory, and then the whole episode is about going through that person's backstory and resolving it. And so each episode is different. So I kind of figure I'd be sort of like that person on The Mandalorian. I'd own an establishment where people would come in, and I'd have some sort of mysterious past. How about you, Alex?
I don't know. I'll probably just be a bartender. I don't know. I always wanted to own a bar.
I can picture Alex yelling, "We don't serve droids here." I like that one.
What about you, Jason?
I'd probably be, I don't know, I'd probably, since I was such a huge fan of Star Wars and specifically Boba Fett, I mean, that action figure alone, I think, is one of the coolest action figures that had ever been made. Just loved the character design, loved just every little nuance. I remember, finding out that a different guy voiced it than was in the suit. And I remember finding out that Jeremy Bullock, who was in the suit, would often show up at comic conventions. And I've seen him at Comic-Con before. That's always so cool. So I'd probably have to go with kind of a more standard cliche answer, like another Mandalorian or a Cobb Vance type of character. Some type of bounty hunter, maybe something like that. But on The Mandalorian, my biggest disappointment, I love that show, just like everybody does, but my biggest disappointment is when IG 11 dies in the first, right at the, fairly soon or whatever. And I'm like, I thought this was sizing up to be a buddy show. Like, these guys are such awesome, totally opposite characters that do not get in at least in probably both cases just kind of hate each other or whatever. But I just loved the chemistry of that. I mean, it's totally fine. The show has been awesome ever since then, and loved when they brought him back, and then was pissed off again when when he died again. But that's just one thing that I still think about on that show. Anyways, go ahead.
It's funny you mentioned Cobb Vanth. I'm a fan of Timothy Oliphant, and I also loved Deadwood. And wouldn't it have been kind of cool if Ian McShane showed up in the same episode?
Oh yeah, definitely. You can never get enough Ian McShane. I also was a big fan of Deadwood, and I'm also a really big fan of a hidden gem movie that not many people have seen called Sexy Beast. I might have mentioned that one to you before. It's a British film starring Ray Winstone and Ben Kingsley. It's a British mob story. It's very probably could be compared to a Guy Ritchie mob movie like Snatched.
Okay,
but not many people know about it, and it's really British. There's not many recognizable actors outside of Ben Kingsley in it, but it is so good, so awesome. Anyways, I just went off on that tangent, but I love that movie.
I just wrote that down because I'll definitely look it up.
Ian McShane. That's the first time I saw him, I think, because I think it came out before. Yeah, no, this is like 2001, and he is in that. He plays a small role of a bad guy, and he is so badass in that movie. It was like I instantly fell in love with that guy. So then when he showed up on Deadwood, I was like, oh yeah, all right, I'm on board. This guy's awesome. He scared the F out of me back when I was watching Sexy Beast. Him and Ben Kingsley have just amazing performances in that. Just a great, if you like Snatched, this is a total hidden gem that you got to watch. Sexy Beast. Crazy. I think that's one of the reasons why it's like people are like, what's Sexy Beast? What's that? It's just kind of it's ironic. There's a lot of humor in it, like a Snatched mobster comedy. There's a lot of humor in it, and it's kind of a little bit of an ironic play, but it doesn't really tell you what to expect because it's actually a really hard edged European mobster story. But anyways, go ahead. I didn't mean to derail us again.
No worries, brother. If you could have one meal with anyone dead or alive, who would it be with, and what or where would you eat? I've been thinking a lot about Anthony Bourdain lately, just because I miss his shows, and I miss his wit and his writing. So I definitely want to hang out with Anthony Bourdain, and I know that he has a love for Vietnam, and having lived in Orange County for pretty much 10 years, I miss the Vietnamese food there, just because it's the largest population of Vietnamese here in the States, and the food was awesome. I mean, here in San Diego, you go to a Vietnamese restaurant and they have a bunch of stuff. But in Little Saigon, you go to these mom and pop shops, and they would specialize in one thing. So we would go to a certain place they specialized in chicken pho. One specialized in spring rolls. So you'd know that all the food was just awesome and delicious. So I've been craving Vietnamese food, and I've been thinking about Anthony Bourdain. So that's the person I would want to hang out with, and Vietnam would be the place that I'd want to go to with him. Alex?
One person I'd like to have a meal with would be probably Bruce Lee. He was just a superstar back as a kid, watching his movies. Also, some of his philosophy in martial arts I kind of took into like everyday life. Just take the best of whatever it is and just apply it to your life. And that's what you did with martial arts. So I kind of apply that to everyday life type of things. And one place he would have been 80 years old this month.
Wow,
so that's
80.
Pretty cool. And yep. I think November 27th was his birthday. So around Thanksgiving time. And place I'll probably eat is probably his favorite restaurant in Hong Kong somewhere. wherever it was.
You know what his favorite meal or dish was? I think I
I
remember
don't
reading
recall.
somewhere it was broccoli beef.
No way.
Yeah.
Probably.
I will think of him next time I have broccoli beef because I like that too.
Jason.
I would have to say Rod Serling or Stanley Kubrick. There's
Nice.
definitely people that I am more fanboyish over, but the respect and love I have for those men and their work is so deep that it would be the one conversation that would just be a thrill to have, and just learn. Just try and delve into their creative process more. Unfortunately, with Kubrick, he's pretty tight-lipped about his work, so obviously he's passed on. But so maybe if it was his ghost, he would be open, like say, oh, "Okay, I'll tell you what I meant when I made The Shining or 2001 or whatever." But when he was alive, he was really kind of against that. So that would be a little bit of a limitation because I'd really love to hear more about that type of stuff. But him and Serling was such a hero to me with Twilight Zone as a kid. It was such a perfect melding of science fiction, fantasy, but also stories with heart and humanity. Dramas about characters that could be interesting to people of all walks of life, regardless of whether they're sci-fi or fantasy fans. So I think that he was just so important to the development of genre material in American television. Because of that, and because of what he brought to the medium, he's just always been a hero of mine. And so, I don't know. I would definitely, as far as what we eat, I'd say whatever they want to eat, that's what I would do it, just as a little extension of having a moment to, kind of pick their brain and get their perspective. I would do what they wanted, but and I don't know what they would want, but I would assume, with Serling, he kind of looks like was a kind of a hip swinging dude from the 60s that would, be seen at a steak club having cocktails with, Dean Martin or something like that. And so I'd be thinking of maybe a big steak with Rod Serling. And I think I might have read somewhere that Kubrick was vegetarian. So probably do something vegetarian with him, I guess. But whatever they wanted, that's what I would go with.
Awesome. Those are some pretty good choices. If you were president of the United States, what artwork would you hang up in the Oval Office? Being president is a serious job, and having known Bobby Rubio and also worked at his booth at San Diego Comic-Con, I'm familiar with his work, and his work just cracks me up. They all have an air of being whimsical, and that's one thing I love about Bobby's work. So I think you need a little bit of that in the Oval Office, so you don't take things too seriously, and you have time to. And it's a good reminder to sort of decompress. So that's what I would hang up in the Oval Office. Alex.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll probably hang up some Leonardo da Vinci's stuff. Probably like some of his scientific sketches on there. I like science, and he's a Renaissance man, scientist and artist.
Cool. Yeah, one thing about Da Vinci is that him being the person that he was, he experimented, and unfortunately a lot of his works suffer from inks that he experimented with, so they didn't last long, so they always have to be restored. Jason.
Well, my first thought would be to do something political, because it's politics. It's the White House. So why wouldn't you use comic artwork that, is an example of a crossover between comics and politics, and you think, okay, well, what would that be? Well, there was a president prominently in the comic book Watchmen Or there was a comic book Ex Machina by Brian K. Vaughan that was about a politician who gets superpowers or whatever. And then I started thinking about it and thought, okay, well, maybe that might send a little bit the wrong message. Obviously, with superhero comics, there's always some fascist undertones, and so that might not square with people. But I don't know. Maybe I could get away with some real, jingoistic, patriotic Captain America artwork, some old Jack Kirby stuff or something. Maybe him punching Hitler even. But seriously, one thing I would definitely put up there would be artwork from the John Lewis comic book that just came out recently.
March.
Yep. Civil rights icon and longtime Congressman John Lewis. And he was at Comic-Con. I think he might have even been there 2 years in a row to promote it. But I ran into him the second year that he was there, and it was a total thrill to meet the guy. He stopped with me. He was with these three other guys who were a lot younger and dressed in suits. I assume they were his security detail. It turns out that I think that they were the comic book co-creators, the artist and the writer and the colorist or whatever, or maybe the publisher. But they all stopped, and he, had a word with me, shook my hand and everything. I mean, it was really, really amazing moment to shake hands with a man who had such history, such important history of what he did for civil rights in America. That was an experience I certainly never thought I would get from Comic-Con. And so that definitely would be, and because of the comic book and how great it is, and telling that story would definitely be, I would have pages of that baby up on the wall. Definitely.
Nice.
Wasn't Neon cosplay too during that time? Didn't he cosplay as himself?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, you're right. I knew I'd heard of that, but I kind of forgot what the context was. Right. Oh, wait.
I guess during his
you got to
march
explain
with
it.
his
He
backpack.
cosplayed as himself in the 1960s, the same exact way he was dressed on that march, with his trench coat and the backpack over the trench coat and everything. Except he had hair back then.
Yeah, I remember that.
No reports as to whether he wore a wig for the for the cosplay. Or a fake mustache. I think he had a mustache back then too.
It's one of those things like, oh man, I wish I got a copy signed
definitely.
for him. So it's one of those things again. It's one of those things again, right? Where, talk to the old timers as much as you can.
And especially, now that's a guy who wouldn't even normally come to Comic-Con. He came there for that specific thing. I do believe he came twice, but still, it wasn't like he was going to start coming regularly every year. And his district was in Maryland.
Yeah.
So Baltimore, I believe. So, it obviously, and he works in Washington. So obviously, not the kind of person and he's a congressman, which makes it even harder to meet him. So that location, that all that stuff combined means, you'd rarely get a chance out here, on the West Coast to see and meet the guy. And so that was really cool. And of course he's just passed away, and was, it's just really great that that comic book came out when it did, so that he was able to go to Comic-Con and people were able to see him. That was definitely one of the cool Comic-Con experiences of that year.
And definitely. Rest in peace, John Lewis.
I think that was 2017. I think that was the first year I was there for HeroJournalism.
Wow. Speaking of HeroJournalism, since Jason talks about comic book adaptations on the HeroJournalism YouTube channel, what comic book adapted universe, whether it be comics, TV, movies, cartoons, video games, etc., would you want to visit? I had another answer planned, but when Jason started talking about soundtracks, movie soundtracks, one of my favorites is Blade 2. I just love the music from that movie. And if I could be a daywalker, also, then I would want to hunt vampires in the Blade universe. I just have a fascination with vampires, so that's my pick. How about you, Alex?
I'll probably pick Star Trek, just because I like sci-fi, and it's probably a pop culture universe that's probably the most likely that the human race would probably evolve to.
Yeah, I think if you've ever listen to Michio Kaku, the physicist, listening to him, you would think that Star Trek would be a natural progression for our species.
Yeah.
What food would you want to make sure that's in the replicator?
Probably my favorite dish, probably sinigang, which is a Filipino stew, a sour stew with some meat, probably usually beef and vegetables.
Yeah, it's my favorite. One of my favorite dishes.
You got any good
so.
Filipino joints around San Diego, Alex?
Oh yeah, there's one just 2 blocks away from me right now. It's called Tita's Kitchenette. There's always a line out the door, and you get a lot of food for just under $10. Is probably good enough for 2 meals.
Sounds good. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, we'll take you there one day.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Jason, how about you?
I would probably say Star Wars, because there's so many directions that could go. Especially if I would, my version of Star Wars would include expanded universe. I know that they say that that's not canon anymore, I guess, but I am a huge Star Wars fan, and I'm a huge video game fan. And as a fan of adaptations, one of my biggest things in video games has been to collect Star Wars games. I remember playing my first Star Wars games in 1983. I don't know if it was the Star Wars arcade or if it was the Atari 2600 Empire Strikes Back, where you actually got to fight the AT-AT walkers for the first time in video games. That was like mind-blowing to me. So I've always loved that. And in more modern games, they opened up the world so much. I played both of the, I know this is kind of sounding like a video game answer, but it kind of relates. I played both of the Star Wars role-playing games, Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2 for the Xbox, the original Xbox. I've played several of the, Dark Forces 2, Jedi Knight, I think it's subtitled, and so, what I'm getting at is there's such also I've got all of the vehicle-based Star Wars games, Starfighter, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, Jedi Starfighter, so from the original trilogy up through the prequels, pretty much have almost every game that they've come out with. And I love the variety of that universe. The X-Wing games are awesome. The RPGs are awesome. There's not all of them are great, but there's other games where you can become a Jedi. You can, explore just about any facet of that universe. And because of that, it's made me aware of all those facets, because, the same could be said for any of the properties that we're talking about. Certainly Star Trek is similar. And, but just because I've been exposed to enough or so much of this expanded universe stuff, it makes me think of all the different things that you could do, and also it's very much removed from our reality, because like in a way my first instinct would be, well, Marvel, whether the comics or the MCU, because I'm a Marvel zombie. I love everything about Marvel characters and history. But the universe itself that Marvel's in is supposed to be our universe, just with those characters. So it would be maybe not quite as big an impact as actually living in the Star Wars universe, where you could get on a starship and fly over to Tatooine and get in some shenanigans with sand people or something. It's just, there's so many possibilities. Become a bounty hunter, become a Jedi, become a princess. You could do anything in the Star Wars universe.
Anybody can be a Jedi, right?
Yeah. Well, it's better than having it be a genetic a genetic condition you inherit. Midichlorians.
M count. Well, is midichlorians one of your favorite words?
No.
I was checking.
Quite the opposite.
Speaking, our last question for the Thunder Round is, what's one of your favorite words? And for me, this word, serendipity, is sort of appropriate. Well, it is appropriate because I just love how podcasts go. I mean, you go into a podcast thinking how, it may go this way, but at the end of the day, it goes another way. And that's unexpected and cool at the same time. And it's much like how, my experience at, say, going to a comic convention is. It's especially one as huge as San Diego Comic-Con, because you have a plan, but I can guarantee that plan goes out the window because you have to sort of adjust to the panels, to guests maybe wanting to change their time for an interview, to meeting up with friends and catching up. So that you go into San Diego Comic-Con planning for one thing, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a totally different experience, but rewarding at the same time. How about you, Alex? What's one of your favorite words?
I think mine's real basic. Food is my favorite word. I like all kinds of food, like trying new different foods I never had before, and just who doesn't like food?
I'd have to say incisive, because that's one. I like the word. It's not the best word in the world at all, but it was one thing that came to mind when you asked the question, and because to me, one of the things that I try to do with my channel is I try to convey information that the person might not know, and be able to do it with a level of clarity. But when it can get confusing talking about some of these elements of genre history, especially when you're going back into the past, when certain things are not as well documented as they are today. So being able to put those things, especially when people, can't remember the past, maybe they weren't there during the past. I mean, I only remember the end of the 70s. So when I go back into the 60s, you have to really not just relay information, but try and deliver the context that makes it meaningful. So, because anyone can just, look up an encyclopedia and read some old facts, but until you realize how that correlates to the world you do know, today's world, how that's all part of the same tapestry, and that's one thing I try to do is try to do what I can to not just report information, but to provide that context that makes the information meaningful. And so that's why it's like I always have in my mind to try to, it's a goal to be as incisive as possible during the journalism process.
All right. So since this is our 100th episode, a milestone that I'm forever grateful for, because when it comes to podcasts, I once read that a lot of podcasts that start seldom make it past the 7th episode. So us making it to the 100th, I'm really thankful for. And we do have to thank several people that have helped us along the way. I mentioned his name earlier, Ed Santos. He was one of our co-founders, and although he's not active with us anymore, I just want to throw him a shout out. Also, Ted Meneses. He was a contributor early on. He has some pretty awesome articles, so I encourage our listeners to go to our website and look up Ted and read some of his articles. Also, Dean Rita, he's one of our contributing photographers, and he's also someone who's been kind enough to let us use his pad to sort of use as home base when we attend convention centers up in Los Angeles. Alex, I'm sure you want to talk about Dean for a minute.
Oh yeah, call it Hotel Rita. So yeah, thank him for staying at his place. Saves a lot of money actually. Plus, it gives us a chance to reconnect again since he's all the way up in LA.
Right.
So, mm-hmm.
And when I think about sort of what kind of memories stand out when it comes to the Hall H show, it's kind of hard to talk about or to think of any, just because I think of each episode as I think each episode is special in its own way. Each episode is an opportunity for us to showcase an independent creator who's trying to get their work noticed. So I think that's an important thing for us to sort of keep that in mind. So really, when I think of the Hall H show, I think of it as one whole thing. Well, we were talking about San Diego Comic-Con a little bit earlier, and that's one show where it's really busy for me because you set out with a plan, and sometimes that plan doesn't go according to plan. Just as the ebb and flow of the way San Diego Comic-Con goes. And I've attended Comic-Con as of course, as a regular con goer. I've attended it as a content creator, podcaster, as a panelist. My first panel was in 2019 on a podcasting panel. I've also attended as an exhibitor. I worked, both Alex and myself worked on at Bobby Rubio's booth. So in each year holds its own separate set of memories. I remember going to Tony Kim, our first guest for the Hall H show. He used to hold these events called Game of Bloggers, where bloggers from around the country and the world who attend San Diego Comic-Con would meet up for a mixer. And that's where I met Chris Sully, who's part of Nerd Foo. And Chris was really instrumental in giving me sort of like a cheat sheet on how to start a podcast. So, Chris, if you're listening to this, I just want to say thank you for handing me that email of like tips on how to podcast. I've used those tips and I've added to it, and I forwarded it to other people who were interested in creating their own podcast. So, thank you, Chris. I'll always be grateful to you. Not to mention the names the people that we've had on the show, like Keithan Jones. He's been on the show quite a few times. Stefan Frank, Jason Inman, and Ashley Victoria Robinson, Zach Kaplan, David Pepos, David Schrader, Rylan Glorant, Steve Prince. The list just goes on. And I'm sorry if I can't name everybody. I feel like I'm giving an awards speech at the Oscars or the Grammys. But I'll hand it off to Alex. I'm sure he has some awesome memories that he wants to talk about.
Yeah, I guess one of my most memorable ones was our first co-podcast with Jason at the San Diego Comic Art Gallery when we interviewed Matt Dunsford for the first time. That was the first time meeting him, and that's around the same time we met TJ Shelvin too, when he was a manager at the museum, and just listening to everything that Matt had to say was just pretty amazing. It just and how much we got to hang out even more these past few years. So that was like probably my most memorable podcast was that one.
Yeah, definitely. Also, I can't forget Uraeus from Black Heroes Matter. That was a pretty big moment for us. yeah, just and also just the different variety of guests that we've had on the show. We've had tattoo artists like Mike Kellerman. We've had filmmakers like Caitlin Fay and Seth Dacio, my good friend Susie Botello, the founder of the International Mobile Film Festival. Can't forget about her. She's been a big friend to the show, and I'm honored to be a collaborator with her on a few other projects. Yeah. Jason, do you have any memories of the Hall H show that you want to share?
Oh, definitely. I'd have to agree with Alex. That first one at the Comic Museum in Liberty Height or Liberty Station, rather, was just such a blast. Dunford was such a great interview guest, and he was in rare form that day. I seem to recall he was cracking jokes and such. He was really funny, and that was just a really great time. It was good to meet TJ. Loved getting to check out the museum. Just a really good one for as far as my memory is. And another one that I loved was when I think it was the first time we went. We used the library in downtown San Diego as a location, and I think actually Dunford was at that one too.
Yeah, I think it was a recap. Was it? I think it was a recap.
Comic-Con
podcast.
recap. Yep.
Yeah, with Dan also, right?
Dan
Yes.
Barry, yeah.
Dan Barry.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
And Dan Barry's a contributor to Leonard Sultana's what is it, the Convention Collective. Yeah. So yeah, everybody check out that site. And also, gosh, there's just been so many people that who have been on the show. Like Daniel James has been on the show a few times. He's an artist, a local artist here in San Diego who he specializes in pointillism. I love his work. Can't forget our interview with Tony Tran. He does awesome work as well. Yeah, I miss going to like Designer Con. I miss going to shows. And sometimes a lot of these interviews aren't planned. It's just somebody that we see who's, who we think might have an opportunity to talk with us. There's a break and the people they're talking to in line, and we'll kind of think, okay, yeah, we'll ask if they want to come on the show, and so far it's been a pretty cool experience. A lot of the Designer Con interviews were like that, sort of on the spot, impromptu.
Yeah, that's something that is both the critical element of covering the con, but it's also a frustrating element for me because it's a critical element because that's, I think, how you can get a lot of stuff. It's just happenstance. There's people who you're not going to have their contact info and not be able to set something up prior to the con, set it up prior to the con to happen at the con. A lot of times it's just that being in the right place at the right time. They've got some free time, even if they're a big creator. If they're not doing anything at the moment, they're really often receptive. But the downside is I mean, you just got to go in cold. Sometimes you got to go in without having been able to do any preparation. Look up some research on their career so that you know which areas you want to focus in on or whatever. It's like, you're just totally going in blind and trying to sink or swim, basically.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, during the course of these 100 episodes, I think we've gotten better at sort of picking up verbal and visual cues so we can sort of, see what kind of questions we can ask or sort of steer the conversation a certain way. I don't know. I mean, were you always? I'm sure it's different for everybody, but were you always cognizant of that, Jason?
Of which?
Of like coming from a broadcast background of picking up visual and verbal cues when you're interviewing people.
Yeah. I didn't know in what context, if you meant like, it sounded like you're saying like whether you could approach him at all, but you're talking about during the interview?
Yeah, during the course of the interview.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's sometimes it depends a little bit if you have a lot of pre-researched material that you want to go through, you may be leading the conversation more, but a lot of times that's not the case. And that ebb and flow, responding to what they're, what they're, and what's going through their mind and what they're trying to convey rather than just what you're trying to ask. And also picking up on the little nuggets. One of the things that I've noticed that frustrates me with a lot of interviews is when sometimes an interview subject is very not talkative. Sorry for the double negative there or whatever. They're giving you short answers. They're not really elaborating on things.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it can be a result of their comfort level or whatever. But regardless, one way to deal with that is to just engage with it. And I think a lot of times, people don't realize that you can ask a follow up and say, "Oh, tell me more about that." So it's like a lot of times I'll watch interviews with people and they ask a good question on a good topic, and the guest kind of maybe they want to, sometimes you want to give a glib answer because it might be funny, or a sarcastic answer or whatever, but you don't get much information out of that. You just get a funny little chuckle, and so it's perfectly right for the person to follow up and ask again to kind of get the more meat of the subject out. But then instead they just go on to their next question or whatever, and you're like, so yeah, I think a big part of it is to try to pick up on what's going through the interviewee's mind, and a lot of that is verbal cues, but also what they're saying and how they're saying it too.
Yeah, definitely. I guess going forward, what are some projects that you guys want to tackle, especially during this pandemic? I mean, the pandemic is a good time to sort of hunker down and be creative. What are you guys working on right now? Alex?
I'm not too much of an artistic guy, so I'm just kind of looking ahead of when conventions do open back up. Just researching some live streaming equipment, and hopefully we could start doing that when things get going.
Yeah, definitely. I've been watching more Twitch lately, so that's been a fun experience.
Yeah, it was kind of cool seeing some friends, starting to jump on Twitch and having their own shows.
Yep. Shout out to Pangeekery. Mm-hmm. If you guys want to check out a pretty cool podcast, check out the Pangeekery on Twitch. And they've also sort of started a Pangeekery network. So they have a bunch of other live streaming shows that are under their umbrella.
And how about the Catch-Up Show?
Yeah, the Catch-Up Show, starring our good friend Janice. Yeah. We've known her since college. And Catch-Up... The Catch-Up Show is a sort of Filipino sort of influence show, variety show, I guess you would say. They have a bunch of people, comedians, musicians, Filipino comedians, musicians, and some other Filipino guests as well. So I listened watched for the first time last week, and it was a fun experience.
Yeah, that was my first time seeing it too. I saw you were on, so I jumped on and see what it was about, and it was cool.
Jason.
Oh yeah, in a way, I'm trying to look at the bright side of the pandemic, and the extra time spent, home and quarantined or away from others or whatever. I'm just trying to put to good use for the channel to put extra time that I have towards some new documentary projects I'm working on. And one of the things that I had decided recently with the channel was that I wanted to do a little bit more long format, in-depth documentary work. So I did a video I mentioned earlier a few months ago. The video was on the strange mechanical versions of Pong that they had done and such. And that ended up being, it was kind of like a quirky little topic for me to do for the channel, but I just thought it was so interesting, and it ended up being like about a 23-minute video, which is one of my longer videos. And it took a long time to make because it's fully edited and such, and it was pretty cool because I got a lot of resources that I could, pictures and images I could show that go back to the 70s, and even some stuff in video game or game history rather that goes back to even like the 1920s. So that was pretty cool to do. And so it kind of made me think that I kind of want to shift to that a little bit more. So my channel covers comic books, video games, and movies, but I hadn't done too much on the video game side of the equation. And so that's where I've been focusing my efforts the last probably 2 months or so. So I've been working on that, and then I've got a few comic book projects that are just around the corner. I've also got a new one on Midsummer that I'm gonna write up soon. It might surprise you that someone still has something new to say about the movie Midsummer, but I found something really interesting about that film that I haven't seen anyone else talk about on the internet, not YouTube or critics or commenters or anything. Did you guys see that horror movie Midsummer?
No, I didn't.
From the guy that made Hereditary?
No, but I've heard good things about it though.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. The guy, I mean, with those two movies alone, has instantly become, the hot new face of horror, in modern cinema. I would say Midsummer, it kind of straddles a line. It's not really horror. I mean, there's a little bit in there, but it's actually more of a drama thriller through most of the movie. So some people have actually said they don't really consider it a horror movie, but whatever. I'm just, lumping them together for ease of classification. But yeah,
looks like it's a Scandinavian or Swedish movie, right?
Yeah, it's made by Ari Aster, who is an American, but he got the funding. He got this offer of funding from like the Swedish government or something, some agency in Sweden that was trying to promote Sweden. And so they came to him and they said, hey, we'll fund your movie if you do this movie about Sweden or set in Sweden. And originally they just wanted him to do a very standard like slasher type of horror movie or whatever. But after thinking about it, he decided he wanted to do this this more Swedish folklore type of gothic horror tale. And so he came back to him and said, well, how about if I write this script that I am pitching you now, and then we make that one instead of the schlocky one that you wanted me to make.
So there's another Swedish horror movie that I remember watching.
Let the Right One In.
Yeah, Let the Right One In. That was a good one.
Yeah, definitely.
I enjoyed that one.
Yeah. So in fact, they probably got a little bit of press when that, was such a critical darling, and maybe that might even be the movie that kind of made them think, hey, we should fund a new, horror movie set in Sweden and get a little more press again. Yeah. So anyways, Midsummer, I definitely highly recommend it to you guys. It's really fascinating. Interesting film, scary. Hereditary is very scary. And has at least one moment that is truly horrific, but generally also his movies aren't as subtle and like slow or deliberately paced as M. Night Shyamalan, but they're kind of like somewhat adjacent to, just to give you an idea of the tone, because they're very standard dramas, but but within some fantastical elements. And of course, his is more horror than Shyamalan's would be. But anyways, maybe that's not the best analogy, but I would highly recommend it. Anyways, I found some interesting things out when I watched it that I'm like, I keep looking up articles on it and no one's talking about it. So I'm like, man, I didn't think I'd be doing a video on that, but it just came to me. So that's something that, so I got a couple things on just general movies that I'll be doing, but the next few are probably going to be some deep historical dives on video games. I know I had told you, Aaron, that I was working on a video I thought I was going to do for Halloween on shark-related video games. I thought that might be a little nice thematic, the Jaws horror and all that such. But it ended up being such a huge script that I'm writing for it that I just couldn't get it done in time. So that is one of my next priorities that I'm doing. It's the secret history of shark video games. The games that were influenced and basically created because of the movie Jaws. There's a bunch of these early video games and video game history that were that came out because the companies were trying to cash in on all the Jaws hoopla, but ended up being actually kind of some important games in video game history. But for some reason, because they're so early in video game history, they've never really been fully analyzed or studied by even, you think about it today, there's retro game channels and websites and people doing articles and podcasts and YouTube videos analyzing every element of retro game history. But really, it's the most work is done from the Nintendo Entertainment System on, the first NES moving forward. And then there is a lot done on the Atari in the late 70s and early 80s, but the early to mid 70s arcade games are still very unexplored. And I've found a bunch of landmark firsts in video gaming that no one has covered on the internet. That I mean, I've been searching, trying to see if anyone else had reported any of this, and I was just kind of surprised at how much new information I discovered. So it's a video that takes you through shark related games from the 70s into the 80s, and I think it's going to be a fun topic because I always have loved sharks ever since Jaws as a kid, and yet it's also delving into some really deep history from early video games. So I think it's going to be pretty cool.
Nice. Looking forward to that.
Yeah. And I got a few other video game ones I want to try and do after that before I get to my next comic book and movie related stuff. But I do have some new comic book ones that I want to move forward on as well. I don't know if I told you about I've got a script I'm working on titled "That Time Spider-Man Hit a Girl and Killed Her."
What the?
Yeah, it's about, because there is this one story that was just absolutely gonzo crazy. I remember reading in the mid '80s when I was collecting comic books for the first time, and in this comic book, and think about it, in the mid '80s. I mean, today, there's so, comics have not much hesitancy to show a little violence. This was back in the mid 80s, and there was this crazy plot twist in this comic that resulted in Spider-Man punching someone who turned out to be a woman, and he punched her so hard he killed her. And you're just like, gosh. What?
I've never heard of this before.
Is that crazy or what? Yeah. So that's a video I'm working on that I'm going to do a story and tell that story about that comic book.
That's definitely not the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that we know.
Right. Is that right or what? It's funny. There's another interesting plot point in that story. I won't say what the story is yet. I'll wait till I get the video out and we can talk about it again. But there's another weird plot point in that story that is very similar to the movie Spider-Man Far From Home, the second one with Tom Holland in the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
In the story, Peter goes on a trip to Europe and he doesn't bring his Spider-Man costume. I think I'm trying to remember. I don't remember what the trip was for, but I think it was. I mean, if it was school related, he would have been in college by that time and in the continuity of the comic books. So it wouldn't have been a high school trip or whatever. But anyways, he goes to Europe and he doesn't bring his costume. Now, in the movie Far From Home, you'll remember Aunt May sneaks his costume into his suitcase just in case he needs it. So he ends up having it anyways. But of course, once he's there, Nick Fury is like, hey, we can't have Spider-Man, going around. We got to put you in the stealth suit or whatever, right? So similarly, Spider-Man goes to Europe and he gets involved in this espionage caper. And he's like, oh, dang, I didn't bring my Spider-Man suit, because he was actually did that on purpose because he wanted to, take a break from Spider-Man, yada, yada, yada. So what he does is, of course, in that story, he didn't have Samuel L. Jackson there to give him a stealth suit. So in that story, instead, he goes to a costume shop and buys a cheap off-the-rack Spider-Man costume. I mean, it's totally meta. There's a Spider-Man costume that they sell to kids this was in Germany. So on the back, how the stupid kid costumes always have the name of the character on the costume. Like it'll say Batman. It won't just be a Batman costume. It'll say Batman on it or whatever. Like what superhero puts his name on his costume? No one does that, right? And just like in real life, he's wearing this really crappy, cheap costume, and on the spider on his back it says "Die Spinny," which is German for the spider. It was just so ridiculous looking, and so, anyways, a little weird commonality, coincidence, I guess. Plot point to the Spider-Man Far From Home, but I'm like, I bet a lot of people have not read that comic book and probably didn't notice that little connection there, but it totally stuck out to me.
Let's see. For me, during this pandemic, obviously I've been doing a lot of freelance graphic design. I definitely have been watching a lot of YouTube videos. A lot of I've mentioned this in past podcasts that I've been watching a lot of skateboarding videos for some reason. I don't know why it appealed to me. Maybe I'm just sort of reliving my youth when I wanted to try skateboarding but never did. So I'm living vicariously through these skateboarders in their videos. But I just find it pretty fascinating. Also, a lot of videos on obviously cooking. A local, I guess, celebrity here in San Diego, Sam the Cooking Guy. He has a pretty prolific YouTube channel with him cooking. I always find that pretty entertaining.
You know who's better than that?
Huh?
And a local, Ethan Chulabowski.
Ethan Chulabowski. I've never heard of him.
Never heard of him either.
Oh,
I'll look him up.
Oh, he's so cool. And get this. So I'm watching his show the other day because I also have been watching more cooking videos because I've been just trying to, do less bachelor food, more real food, less processed food, all that stuff, get healthier, whatever. And I mean, I guess I've always been healthy, but, a little bit more try new stuff. I've never been a huge cooker. And so I stumbled upon his channel. He had some interesting videos. One of them was a response video to another cooking channel that I watch. And I think that's what started me on it. But one thing that he does is he'll take other recipes and he says, how can we do it 3 different ways better? Healthier, cheaper, faster, or easier, something like that. And so he just has some interesting stuff. Anyways, so I ended up just really liking some of his videos and watched a few of them. And then on one of them, he was talking about spices and a how-to on how to do what to do if you want to get a better spice, a selection of spices for your cooking, what's required and what he would recommend you do or whatever. And one of the things he was talking about buying it by bulk. And he goes to his local grocery store that he gets bulk spices at, and I'm like, holy crap, that's the grocery store that's 5 blocks from my house. I didn't even know he was a San Diego guy. So yeah, he's good. I love Sam the Cooking Guy too, but definitely look him up. He's really cool.
Awesome, will do. I've also been doing a lot of writing, just a lot of short stories and sort of universe building. So we'll see where that goes. It's been fun sort of exploring that side of my creativity, which I haven't really explored a lot in the past. Also, I guess hopefully in the next few months I can also get more back into photography. That's actually, photography was my sort of first love. I was photography editor of my high school newspaper. So I've always wanted to get back into photography. So yeah, there's that. What have you guys been watching or during this pandemic? I know you've probably been doing a lot of watching of movies for your research, Jason. But is there anything that you sort of want to, anything else that you want to recommend to our audience?
I really haven't actually. I watched Mandalorian, but that I really watched the first season. I actually haven't even started the second season, so I have not been really keeping up with too much. In fact, one thing I'm really chomping at the bit about is new movies like Tenet. I'm like, I would assume we'll probably be able to get Tenet on VOD or something, or maybe DVD sometime soon. I mean, that thing left theaters a while ago, and that's something I'm dying for. As you heard, Wonder Woman, I guess, is now going to HBO Max.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, so I'll be planning on watching that on HBO Max. But I'm really bummed out about the Black Widow being delayed. Anyways, so no, I haven't, because I've been digging so deep into research. I got about a half dozen of these kind of in-depth documentaries I've been working on. I mentioned the first one was a shark one, but they're pretty much the biggest work I've done. I mean, I've got some of the scripts are like, getting up into the 5,000, 6,000 word range. So, I mean,
wow, that's pretty hefty.
Yeah, it's crazy. I didn't set out to do it that. I mean, in a way, there's an incentive to do shorter videos on YouTube, specifically. Well, some people would say because that's what some people might be looking for. So they might say it's part of their strategy to get more views. But for me, it helps just to be able to get stuff out the door, because a lot of times I'm doing editing with that, and the shorter the video, the easier that post-production step is going to be for me. So there's an incentive there, but again, if the topic demands it, so these have often started out as smaller projects, but as I uncovered new information, and I've been, really digging into, like magazines and books to try to get me information from back in the 70s and stuff. So I've kind of like, especially the last month, really just sunk myself into this. And I've got like about half a dozen that I'm about to get into production with. In fact, I just got a new lav mic in the mail yesterday. So I'm actually that's one step closer to getting this new wave of documentary videos out the door.
So at 5,000 and 6,000 words, I mean, how long would that video be?
Well, I think the mechanical Pong one was in the $4,000 to $5,000 4,000 to 5,000 word range, and that was about, like I said, 23 minutes. I think 24 minutes. Okay. So I would expect that one of these is probably going to be, over a half hour, which is a little daunting to consider because, they say in editing, it takes an hour to edit every minute. So at 30 minutes, that's like 30 hours of editing. And I actually am embarrassed to admit that I'm actually often a slow editor. Not always. Sometimes I can jam through it, but it depends. Different stages of editing require different level of thought and rejiggering things around and changing things to try and tweak it to make sure it's right. Some stuff's a little bit easier to just blow through. So I actually probably even take a little longer than that. So it's not something, again, that I'm like, trying to do, but I don't know. I personally love more in-depth stuff. And one thing I've noticed with YouTube in my analytics is, and I'm sure you guys have similar stuff with your stuff, YouTube tells you how many people watch your video, but they also show you what parts of it they watched. And so if they, like, at what point they quit watching. So the idea there is that, if you had a dumb part of your video in there that was turning people off, you could say, oh, okay, next time I won't, do that, mistake or whatever, and try to make your content better. But one thing that's cool is, so I've seen with a lot of my longer videos, I'm not getting a huge amount of people that watch them all the way through. However, I'm still getting a significant amount of people that watch them all the way through. And so even though I'm getting not monstrous views on those videos, I'm getting more watch time out of them than I was from shorter videos that are getting more views. And it tells me that there are people that do want to go in depth on a topic. They do, because over the period of 23 minutes of a video, you can stop watching at any time. If something's starting to bore you, you can do it. And even if only 25% of the people, do that, I'm getting, still way more watch time than I would off of a 8-minute video that's way more successful. So it heartens me to see that there's a little bit of a market for more real in-depth stuff. And I don't, it's easier to do the like slick and shallow stuff, like, Watch Mojo top 10 list or some, corporate BS that's easy to crank out. But that's just not why I do it. I like, finding these little nuggets of info and context that people didn't know about, even if it's something that they never, didn't even know that they were interested in learning about.
Yeah, definitely. Looks like you're at 736 subscribers. I would encourage our listeners to go check out your YouTube channel, HeroJournalism, and subscribe and try to get you up to 1,000. So you can start monetizing.
That would be awesome. Yeah, you can find it by searching HeroJournalism, all one word, or youtube.com/HeroJournalism. I would appreciate it. That's great. I mean, the channel's been moving up, but it's obviously just a really long slog, and so I'm hoping to get a little boost. And I'm certainly looking forward to reaching that first big milestone of 1,000 subscribers.
Yeah, if you've enjoyed listening to Jason on this podcast and our previous episodes, I mean, you'll totally enjoy his videos because he does a good job on them.
Yep, and they're scripted, so maybe I don't go off on tangents quite as much.
We love your tangents on this show.
Oh, thank you.
Alex, what have you been watching during the pandemic or recently?
I've been watching a lot of live streamers on Twitch. I was mostly a lot less TVs and movies, but one TV show I caught on was, I think it just released recently, was Hellstrom.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I just watched the first episode, but it got me interested in looking forward to finishing the series. Mm-hmm. And that's on Hulu, I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it is on Hulu, right? Yeah, that's one of the weirder little MCU projects that they've got going on. Well, certainly it's also one of the weirder Marvel comic characters. I mean, I don't know if I remember running across a few appearances of Hellstrom back in the this would have been the early to mid 80s for me, but probably most of those issues would have been like old issues from the 70s that I found in the quarter bins, because the character wasn't around much in the 80s, kind of like Blade. He wasn't around much in the 80s, but then showed up big again in the 90s along with Blade when Marvel relaunched all of their horror concepts as kind of like a a little sub imprint. So I'm trying to remember. I think it was called Midnight Suns, and it had Ghost Rider, Hellstrom, the Darkhold, and Blade, and I think maybe even Nomad. I'm not sure. That might be. Oh no, maybe I'm just thinking Blaze. It was also the human version of Ghost Rider. I think might have had his separate. I don't know. It was really weird. They split Ghost Rider into two beings around that time. Anyways, but it's so Hellstrom has always been kind of a weird Marvel character, a little bit, because it's that horror and demonic horror, but he still kind of had some of the superhero trappings and such. Now it looks like it's much more of a straight up, kind of a little bit more like Constantine, maybe. The movie Constantine. I don't know. Is that right, Alex? I actually haven't seen the show. You tell me.
Yeah, I just saw the first episode, but it kind of gave me some remembrance of the TV show back, I don't know, it was late 80s, early 90s, Friday the 13th, where they go out and try to bring back artifacts that was, haunting and demonic and put it in a safe place.
For listeners who are not familiar, or think they're familiar, but it'll turn out that they're not. That's not the Friday the 13th movie series, but a TV totally show, right, which was an anthology, same starring characters, but each week they dealt with another cursed object, kind of in a Twilight Zone-y way. But it kind of sounds hokey. It sounds like they're using the movie's name in a cheesy way, but it ended up becoming a very cult classic and loved little fringe genre show.
Yeah, that's probably not too many other TV shows. Mandalorian. I haven't, like you, Jason. I haven't seen the second season yet, so I got to start that up.
Yeah, definitely. Katie Sackhoff is coming to town.
That's right. That was a good episode.
Oh, you watched it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, there's Star Trek Discovery on Thursdays and The Mandalorian on Fridays, so it's obviously good for people who love sci-fi.
Definitely. They were talking about Katie Sackhoff for Captain Marvel back in the day.
I could see that.
I don't know if Marvel was ever serious about it, but I remember people suggesting that, and I'm like, oh yeah, I would love that.
It's kind of cool that Katie Sackhoff gets to star in as a live action version of a character that she voice acted.
That's very cool too. You're right. Of course, she voice acted that character Bo-Katan in the Rebels TV show, and also Clone
I love
Wars,
Rebels. I think it was. Gosh, it's funny because I watched Rebels before I watched Clone Wars, and so everything just sometimes bleeds into one whole thing.
Well, Rebels would be closer in timeline to Mandalorian because both of them. I mean, Clone Wars was in the prequels. Rebels is right before A New Hope. And
but she was also Satine's sister, so I don't know. Maybe she did show up in Clone Wars,
but not as the same character. Or
no, I think so.
Oh, yeah.
I think so. But I could be wrong.
Maybe she just lives a long time. Because that would be, Obi-Wan Kenobi was in the Clone Wars, and look how old he was in the first, A New Hope.
No, you're right.
But I don't know. Maybe she's an alien. Who knows?
Let's see. You mentioned Hellstrom, which is on Hulu. There's another show another Marvel show that's on Hulu called Legion. I just binge watched all 4 seasons of that, or was it 3 seasons? 3 or 4 seasons. Anyway, I thought it was pretty interesting. It's really out there. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Legion from Marvel.
I am. I haven't I haven't watched it, but I had a friend who watched it, and she said it was fantastic, and she got me really excited about it. And I have seen some clips, and I know a little bit about the very, unique visual presentation that they use for like some of the powers and battle sequences and stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely a different take than what I was expecting. But I enjoyed it nonetheless. So, if any of our listeners are listening to this podcast, I really recommend Legion. It was definitely an interesting watch.
It just blows my mind that the Shadow King, the X-Men villain, the Shadow King, is is in live action TV on prime time. Of course, it's not anymore. Now it's on Hulu, but it was originally a primetime Fox show, and it just that blows my mind. One of the first comics I got before I could even read was an early X-Men. It was probably like X-Men, like, I don't know, I'm guessing it'll be off, but it'll, something like 118 or something like that. Anyways, it was a flashback story of how Professor X met Storm and recruited her when she was just a little child in Cairo.
Yeah, that's right.
And in that story, he faces off against the Shadow King, because the Shadow King is like the evil guy, controlling all the orphans and making them, become thieves and such. Well, he faces off with them in a psychic battle. And in the psychic battle, they're mutating into different, forms and stuff. And it was like impossible for me to comprehend what the hell was going on in that story. I mean, it was cool, especially because at one point, like, they transform into gladiator costumes, but instead of like a sword, Professor X had a lightsaber. I mean, it was clearly
they're in the astral plane.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what I mean. They're facing off psychically. You're right. I should have clarified in the astral plane. And I mean, to try and figure out, especially like the first times, and I say that in plural, the first times I went through the book, I couldn't even read yet. But even once I could read, it was like, I barely knew anything about these characters. It was totally, it was I was way too young. So it's so crazy. A character that I remember I couldn't even comprehend when I first started looking at comic books, to see that character, has become a villain in, a prime time mainstream television show. Just blows me away how far comic books have come in their, pop culture, exposure.
Yeah. And obviously, when it comes to adaptations, the creative team, usually takes liberties, with the characters and the story. So, I mean, Legion's no different. So just don't expect it to be verbatim what you read about growing up.
Mm-hmm.
One interesting thing about Legion is that I was pleasantly surprised when you get to season 3. There's a character in there named Switch that's portrayed by an artist that we follow. Her name's Lauren Tsai, and so that was pretty cool to see her as a character in Legion. So that was a pretty cool surprise.
Oh wow! Does she do acting aside from that, or is that her first foray into it?
That's her. I think that was pretty much her first foray into acting. I think she's actually acting in another project right now, but she's known as an artist slash, I guess, model.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
Let's see here. I guess we'll start winding down the show, but of course, there's a part of the show that we always want to showcase called Superhero Shoutouts. Is there a creator you want to shine the spotlight on, or maybe somebody you want to recognize just because they're awesome? I guess, Alex, we'll start with you first.
First of all, I would like to shout out you for starting a podcast 100 episodes ago.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, and just your dedication to the podcast and to your other endeavors like Comic-Con Fit and Mobile Film Festival and your career. So shout out to you and other friends who've helped us throughout this journey of Hollitch.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. Jason.
Well, just as a little bit of an addendum to the what are you watching lately? One of the reasons why I hadn't been as watching as much is because I'd been doing a lot more reading, and I don't have a comic book that I've been reading in the very recent past here that I can recommend, but I do have two books that I've really been digging into. One of them is the Art of X-Men, the Animated Series, a brand new book by Eric Lewald, who was the story editor of X-Men, the Animated Series, the cartoon that ran on Fox from 92 to 97, I believe. And it is absolutely amazing. About 2 years ago, Lewald had come out with a book that was just a more of a straightforward, prose book about the making of the show and all kinds of behind the scenes information or whatever. And this is a bit of a companion to it. And of course, Lewald and many of the X-Men writers and animator staff had been coming out to Comic-Cons for the 25th anniversary of the cartoon, which the book was timed to coincide with. And so I know that you guys have been seeing a lot of that at the cons that we've both been going together, San Diego Comic-Con as well as San Diego Comic Fest. I know that I've seen you guys at several of the X-Men animated series panels, and I know that at times you guys have even helped me out by doing some extra recording and such for me. And so it's cool. So he's back at it again with a sequel book, this one focusing on the art. And it's a beautiful art book. It's much, it's a really kind of a high-end coffee table book. And it's huge. And it's just packed with tons of production art, cell models, memos from internal memos on stories from Fox Brass, all kinds of stuff. I mean, just an amazing resource of information. Really tons of really behind the scenes stuff. Even though it's an art book, it still has a lot of great information in it too, aside from just the beautiful visuals. But it's just a fantastic book, and it is still, even though it's an art book, it's packed with great information. And so I've been going through that. It's been really fun to see. One of the coolest things I found in it was I was curious what you guys would think. So they had some rejected character designs. So they had character designs for story pitches that never ended up becoming full scripts. Or they did, but the script was rejected. Like, they actually have one script in there that was an Omega Red script that was they ended up not going with for some reason. And so that stuff like that I found fascinating, but also some rejected character designs. And one of them was Arcade. I don't know if you know the X-Men villain Arcade, but I always thought that was one of the few X-Men villains that they should have had in the show that they didn't. And apparently it was pretty close to him making an appearance. I don't know. Do you guys know who Arcade is?
No, I'm not familiar with that character.
Okay, Arcade.
No, never heard of him.
Well, he's a little more prominent now, I think, but back in the day, he was a fairly obscure character, and I know this because I collected every appearance I could find of him, and there were not many. I think there were about half a dozen back when I collected, which would have been, like 87 or earlier, I guess. And he appeared in the classic run of Byrne and Claremont on X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
And basically his deal was he was a super villain. He was an assassin, but the way he did it was he would build elaborate death traps, lure his target into the death traps, and then watch them try and fight the death traps to escape or whatever. So he didn't have any like superpowers. He was kind of like a man pulling the strings or whatever. But one of the coolest things he did was he lured the X-Men into an amusement park where all the rides and attractions were designed to kill them. and he was called Murder World. So Arcade was like a totally totally crazy character, and just totally unlike anything that you'd seen before at that time, I guess. And anyways, I got 2 of the 3 issue story that he first appeared in X-Men, but I couldn't never get the 3rd issue because it was like super expensive. The only reason why I got the first 2 was I found really beat up copies in the quarter bins or whatever. So it was a classic character in that sense, and that he appeared in that really very much praised run of those guys on X-Men, and just a totally quirky character, and he had a pretty cool angle with his murder world and his traps and such. He's also appeared fighting Spider-Man and such. So that was crazy to think that we almost had an arcade story in X-Men the animated series.
Wow, that's pretty wild.
And then I got one more book as well. It's not a new book. The X-Men animated series art book is brand new. It just came out a few weeks ago, so you can get that now. But another book I got was an older book by Tom DeFalco called Marvel Chronicles, and it goes through every year of Marvel history. And for every year, it has a couple pages just noting every, highlights of what happened at the company or some of the notable things in the comic books that were released that year. It's really fascinating. And I have to thank actually Comic Book Nostalgia, a YouTube channel who I've made an acquaintance with. But I also follow his content, and he recently had a video where he used that as a source, and I thought that is so cool. I went and ordered it up, and I'm really loving it. It's really cool. Tom DeFalco covered some really cool information. Plus, like I said, I like all the stuff that a lot of people don't really care about as much, like some of the older stuff. So it's been really cool to kind of go through and see stuff about the Golden Age Marvel that I didn't know before. That's been really fun.
Dude, Jason, it's always awesome having you on the show because, you're just so. I learned something each time you're on the show. I don't know how do you feel about that, Alex?
Oh yeah, I mean that's why I like bringing him on just to listen.
Oh, thank you guys so much. I appreciate that. It's funny because as I was saying it, I'm like, I know you said a lot of times you're like, hey, any indie people you want to, shine a spotlight on? And I'm like, well, this isn't real. I don't know if this counts as indie people. I guess that X-Men art book is a little bit of an indie deal. It's not like it's a major, I don't know. It's actually a really, really good publisher or whatever, but Lewald really kind of, I think the first one was really a bootstraps, book. So he's really kind of, climbed up to that level. So, but yeah, anyways, I was like thinking, oh, this is a little bit more mainstream, but so I'm glad you guys appreciated that.
Yeah. If any of our listeners want to check out, hopefully someday when Comic-Cons come back, the Lewalds and Larry Houston put on some awesome panels when it comes to the X-Men animated series.
Yeah, and that one of the things that excited me about the book was I was like, oh, great, because I was worried that eventually they might, not be, because they've been coming around to the cons for probably about 2 years straight now, maybe a little bit longer. They've done the 2 cons we mentioned here in San Diego, but also have done some stuff up in LA and at some stuff outside of California too. So I was worried that they might start getting sick of it a little bit, but once I heard about the book, I thought, oh, awesome. I bet they will be back at the cons because they got new stuff to talk about, and that means more X-Men panels, and I'll be there in the front row with bells on.
Me too. And we'll be singing the theme song.
Right. You know what? They're also really good people too. They're just really nice people, and just very sweet. So good about answering questions and dealing with idiot hecklers who ask stupid questions and panels and such. I think I told you that one time where one stupid lady. I apologize for calling her that, but I got to be honest with you. She goes, God, she said something. Now I can't remember how she exactly phrased it, but it was something to the effect of something about how bad the cast was. Like, too bad the cast was so bad, the voice cast. And I mean, I almost blew a gasket when I heard that. Of course, the Lewalds deflected it very nicely. They, just, responded, politely about what their thoughts on it were, and then moved on or whatever. But I was like, oh my gosh, are you nuts? Those were some of the best, Toronto trained theater or Toronto theater trained actors that would have been available in cartoon voice acting at that time. I mean, some of those people were known for acting in Shakespearean theater productions in, the best theaters in Toronto, which is one of the major cities of the world. It's absolutely ridiculous. So they're really good people, the Lewalds. They they were a lot more polite and diplomatic with that woman than I would have been.
For my superhero shout outs for this episode, I want to send a shout out to somebody that I want to get on the podcast hopefully soon. Benito Batista. He's the executive director and co-founder of the San Diego Filipino Cinema. I recently attended a mixer for an event that he helped put together, showcasing some short films created by Filipino filmmakers here in San Diego. So that was a pretty cool little Zoom meeting where I got to hang out with the filmmakers and get to know them a little bit. And I watched all their films yesterday. So it's a good job on them for putting those films together and organizing everything. If anybody wants to find out more information about Benito and the San Diego Filipino Cinema, you can go to SD Filipino with an F, cinema.org. And also want to throw a shout out to Tony B. Kim from Hero Within. I know times are a bit tough right now, especially for small businesses. So I think it's important for us to support these small businesses during the holidays. I know Tony's taking a hit, especially with the majority of his business coming from conventions. So, I would love for our listeners to at least go check out some of the cool, sophisticated geeky wear that Hero Within has to offer. If you go to HeroWithinStore.com to check out their stuff, I'm sure he would really appreciate it. And he has this quote that I found on his site. It goes like this, quote, "As fans, we've grown up settling for limited and boring nerd style. While our passion hasn't changed, our fashion needs have. This collection was designed to be sophisticated while shamelessly embracing our geeky side. Timeless fashion for timeless fandom. Welcome to Hero Within." And I'm a proud supporter, and I have worn several of their button-down shirts for business meetings, podcasts, and other sort of business casual events. So go check them out, HeroWithinStore.com. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about before we close out the show?
I just want to thank you guys for inviting me for your 100th podcast. I mean, I'm so thrilled that you guys are still kicking at 100, and I know all the work you guys put into it. And it's funny, I've got over 100 videos for the YouTube channel, but I've got videos that are sometimes as short as like 3 minutes or even less than that. In fact, one little thing actually I do want to mention is, it's funny, I might have mentioned this last time we were on, but for Comic-Con, since Comic-Con was canceled, I went through a bunch of my old videos and I pulled out just like half a dozen little clips of just raw footage from Comic-Con, stuff that you couldn't have seen unless you were there at Comic-Con, and some of it going back all the way to 2001. So, I got a few minutes here and there of me hanging around in the autograph area where director Robert Wise and John Carpenter and the Mr. Show guys were signing autographs and stuff. And I was hanging out at the Bongo comic booths when Matt Groening was signing comic books and stuff. And so Also, there's a little tour of the South Park mini golf course that was set up a few years ago. I don't know if you ever got a chance to see that.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, right across from the convention center, like in front of those condos, those tall condos. You know, they always have stuff on the grass there or whatever. Well, I think it was like right by one of the restaurants. A big section of that was cordoned off to be the South Park mini golf course, and so they had a course of all kinds of crazy, weird mini golf things, but all the obstacles and stuff, or at least on the sides, it was all adorned by giant wood cutouts of different characters and buildings and all kinds of stuff from South Park. And so I'm like, that's just a little weird thing. I remember walking by and I thought, oh, that's kind of funny. I'll just record a little bit of that, and all of a sudden I'm like, I still have that in my archives. I never did anything with it. And so it just kind of fit into this little thing. I thought, I'll put out about a half dozen videos of just little slice of life videos. There's no, narration. It's all raw footage, and, just check it out and, see little bits of what Comic-Con was like, especially, the ones with the some of those celebrities where like that goes back to 2001. Director Robert Wise was there to promote the re-release, the DVD release of the director's cut of Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Wow.
And John Carpenter and Joanna Cassidy, the actress, were there to promote Ghosts of Mars, his movie Ghosts of Mars. Yeah, so it's just crazy little time capsule stuff or whatever that I threw out on the channel. But anyways, my previous point was that I can't imagine 100 podcasts, you guys. So I'm so impressed with that, and all the awesome interviews that you've lined up, and all the awesome indie creators that you've turned me on to. I just love this stuff. So really thrilled and wanted to congratulate you guys on the 100 podcasts and more to come. And thank you again for inviting me.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure having you on the show. And I'm glad that we've been able to keep in touch through all these years. Before I throw it to Alex, I just want to say to Alex, likewise, I mean, I've known Alex since our San Diego State days. So we're going on over
30 years.
Oh, yeah. Is it 30 years? Wow.
Oh, close to it.
Wow. Yeah.
Almost.
We've been through a lot.
Sneaks up on you.
The countless parties and going up to LA and going to different other places. And I'm just thankful that me and Alex have been able to stay friends. And now we're fellow content creators. And I'm just honored to know you guys. And also to our listeners, I just want to say thank you so much. I really appreciate your support.
Yeah,
Alex,
thank you so much.
Yeah. Would you close out the show?
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for tuning into the Hall H Show podcast, where we love showcasing independent pop culture creators. We wouldn't have come this far without awesome supporters of the podcast, so thank you very much. If you believe in our mission to be the voice of independent pop culture creators, we would love a rating, hopefully 5 stars, and a comment on Apple Podcasts. You can also find us on Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or our website, hallh.com. Also, please share our episode using the hashtag HallH Show. Peace and cheers to 100 more episodes of the Hall H Show. If you would like to recommend a guest that you feel deserves more attention, please reach out to us on any of our social media accounts or the contact form on our website. Thanks again.